Chapter 381, The Famous Cameo. Just as the Illuminati delegation was wrapping up discussions about Hydra's activities and Wakanda's diplomatic overtures, the room's atmosphere shifted. From nowhere, a lone figure appeared. "It's an embarrassment to Hydra," he sneered, stepping forward. "You call yourselves Hydra, but look at you." Clad in a black mask and a windbreaker, eerily similar to Wesker's, with dark hair cascading down his back, the stranger froze everyone in their tracks. "Who are you?" one of the Hydra operatives finally demanded. The man smiled beneath his mask. "I've heard you Illuminati have been searching high and low for me. Well, here I am." A hush fell over the assembled heroes and agents. Then someone, an Illuminati operative with modest superpowers, ventured a guess. "Black Caesar?" Tony Stark's eyes widened in disbelief. "It can't be. Black Caesar, just like that? You showed up here, surrounded by Hydra's prisoners." Tony frowned, recalling how Hydra's recent operations had lacked their usual roster of heavy hitters, Bronski, Red Tank, and the rest. Now he understood. With Black Caesar's sudden appearance, those absences suddenly made sense. Across the room, Captain Marvel's expression shifted from boredom to keen interest. She'd thought the meeting was dragging, until now. Ethan had just wrapped up the case in Winktown and was planning his next move to uphold justice when the man he'd been hunting, Black Caesar, finally appeared. "It really is him," Ethan muttered, stepping forward with a cocky grin. "Black Caesar, you're under arrest." Captain Marvel hovered beside him, eyes narrowed. "Agreed. We can't let someone this dangerous run free." Before they could close in, Thor thundered into the clearing. "Why waste words? Let's take him down now." Thor had long wanted to measure Black Caesar's fabled strength for himself, and the idea of direct combat thrilled him. With a determined shout, he invoked the power of his enchanted hammer, Mjolnir. Lightning danced across its surface as he swung it overhead and sent it hurtling toward their quarry. The very air rippled in its wake. Then, in a moment that stole everyone's breath, Black Caesar caught the hammer, mid-flight, with nothing but raw muscle. Mjolnir shuddered violently in his grasp, arcs of lightning flaring outward. Thor froze, astonished. Never before had anyone dared, let alone succeeded, to seize his hammer by sheer force. And yet here stood Black Caesar, holding the weapon of the Thunder God as if it were nothing more than a toy. Boom, boom, boom. The ground convulsed beneath them, ripping up millions of tons of earth and rock and hurling debris in every direction. Shockwaves blasted outwards, shattering trees and stone into dust. At the epicenter, where Black Caesar stood, bolts of lightning and thunderclaps converged in a furious storm, a no-survivor zone where any intruder would be vaporized. Ethan didn't bother activating his biological force field. Instead, he went all out on pure physical strength, unleashing a ferocity so raw it sent even Thor tumbling through the air. The Thunder God's expression flickered with shock as he slammed into the ground yards away. Captain Marvel's eyes snapped wide. In a flash, she blinked out of the blast radius, narrowly evading the electrified onslaught. Black Caesar's deep voice rolled over the chaos. "Well then, this hammer, this is the legendary Mjolnir, isn't it?" The assembled Illuminati froze, staring in disbelief at the gleaming weapon gripped in his hand. Legend spoke of Thor's hammer, but none truly expected to see it. A stunned whisper rippled through the group. "It can't be real." Their hearts raced. Even as secret keepers of cosmic power, they couldn't resist the temptation. Whether Avengers or members of the Illuminati, each felt the same irresistible urge to test themselves against the hammer of a god. Ethan and the others all understood that Thor's hammer wasn't something you could just pick up at will. Even Captain Marvel had admitted that, without shifting into her binary form, she wouldn't so much as budge Mjolnir, though she'd never tested it once she was empowered. In any case, Carol wasn't exactly the competitive type for this sort of challenge, so nobody was prepared for what happened next. With a casual flick of his wrist, Black Caesar caught Mjolnir midair as if it were a mere pebble. Ethan's jaw dropped. He recalled how even the strongest Saiyan warriors had tried and failed to grasp the hammer. Yet here was Black Caesar, the ruthless warlord responsible for untold atrocities, handling it as though it barely weighed an ounce. Saul staggered backward, his heart pounding. As far as anyone knew, there were only two ways to lift Mjolnir. Either you were deemed worthy by its enchantment, or you used some outside force. arcane or technological, to manipulate it. But Black Caesar? Worthy? The thought was absurd. And yet, there it was, the hammer resting lightly in his hand, glowing faintly under his grip. The question on everyone's mind was chillingly simple. How was this possible? Whispers rippled across the battlefield. Could Black Caesar really stand there and say, "My heart and my actions are as clear as a mirror, and everything I do is justice"? Ridiculous. If anything, he ought to admit, "My heart and my actions are as dark as these sunglasses, and I've survived this long purely by luck." A murmur went around that perhaps Black Caesar's strength rivaled Mjolnir itself, that he'd actually caught Thor's hammer in midair. Preposterous. Nobody believed it. And then came the crack. Thor halted mid-strike, eyes narrowing. That's no ordinary sound. Standing at the storm's edge, Ethan, known in the underworld as Black Caesar, tilted his head and smirked. What sound? Thor swung Mjolnir again, channeling its gravitational force. Release it, Ethan. A chill of dread slithered down his spine. Some instinct warned him that calamity was looming. He willed the hammer home, yet Mjolnir didn't budge. It remained locked in Ethan's iron grip. Frustration flared. Thor summoned Stormbreaker, his other axe hammer, and hurled it at Ethan's shoulder. The impact thundered through the air, and Mjolnir groaned, a splintering cry that made everyone flinch. Rushing forward, Thor beheld it. Hairline fractures, spiderwebbing across the once flawless enchanted metal. He staggered back, disbelief written on his face. Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, who'd been watching from above, swooped down at once. Her expression went pale as she registered the damage. She raised a hand to intervene, but Ethan didn't wait. Planting both feet, Black Caesar gripped Mjolnir with renewed force. More cracks spread like lightning across its surface, and then, inside the hollow of the hammer, a blinding bolt of energy erupted. White-hot arcs of electricity slashed outward, illuminating Ethan's triumphant grin and bathing the ruin-strewn plain in searing light. Thor summoned all his strength and hurled his gravity hammer straight at Black Caesar. But at that precise moment, Mjolnir itself shattered in a blinding thunderous blast. Boom! Lightning crackled in every direction, the roar echoing through the skies like 3,000 storms unleashed at once. The explosion's force radiated outward, obliterating everything in its path. Thor's gravity hammer was ripped from his hand. Thor and Captain Marvel were both hurled off their feet like rag dolls. The blast gouged a massive crater into the ground, flinging earth and rock high into the air until they settled as a distant ridge. When the shockwave finally subsided, Thor staggered to his feet, bruised and bleeding, but still burning with determination. He charged forward again, only to see the shattered fragments of his beloved hammer clattering across the ground. No, his anguished cry tore through the battlefield. Mjolnir! Every onlooker froze at the sound of Thor's grief-stricken roar. Mjolnir, his sacred hammer, the symbol of his worthiness, lay in pieces at his feet. It was unthinkable, impossible. How could the unstoppable power of Mjolnir have been reduced to shattered metal? Nearby, too, Nye Stark's jaw clenched. Fury and disbelief warred on his face. He had watched Black Caesar shatter Mjolnir with nothing but his bare hands, and he could scarcely believe his own eyes. "Brother, you're incredible. Why didn't you tell me about something this important sooner?" Chapter 382. Again, Thor, the god of thunder, stood amid the wreckage, a deep regret twisting in his chest. If he could turn back time, he'd never set foot on Midgard, or come in search of his brother. How could his kin matter more than the Meow Meow hammer? The Meow Meow hammer, his steadfast companion through the 9 realms, lay in ruins. Its jagged fragments scattered across the ground, each piece radiating the absence of its former power. Anyone who looked upon it felt the weight of a catastrophic loss. "I'm sorry," Black Caesar stammered, eyes downcast. "It was too weak, and I broke it." "Caesar," Captain Marvel's voice rang out like a warning siren as she hurtled toward Ethan. Her fists crackled with blinding photon energy, enough raw force to pulverize mountains. In the blink of an eye, Black Caesar dissolved into a blur and reappeared between her and Ethan. Captain Marvel skidded to a halt, pupils widening. Here? Black Caesar managed a tight, sheepish grin, as if afraid she wouldn't even notice him. His speed had been impossible to track. Before she could gather herself, his fist rocketed forward. The punch landed flush against her cheek. A horrific dent formed in the flesh. blood blossoming at the corner of her mouth. Captain Marvel staggered backwards, stunned into silence. All around them, the shattered remnants of the Meow Meow hammer lay smoldering, silent witnesses to the Thunder God's deepest regret. With a thunderous bang, Captain Marvel slammed into the ground, disappearing in a spray of dirt and rock. "Are you kidding me?" Tony Stark barked into his helmet. Jarvis immediately steered the Iron Man armor into firing a hail of electromagnetic alloy rounds at the Earth, sending up a shield of debris to slow Black Caesar's advance. Tony gritted his teeth. Before all this, people said we were untouchable, invincible. He shook his head. Clearly, they never met Black Caesar. He and the Hulk had faced the Brute before. They knew exactly how dangerous he was. Tony glanced toward Bruce Banner's hulking form. Only Emperor Ethan might stand a chance against him. With a roar, the Hulk lunged forward. But Black Caesar anticipated the sprint, executed a flawless backflip, and landed solidly behind him. The Hulk's momentum carried him onward. He couldn't stop in time. In a blur of motion, Caesar's elbow smashed into the Hulk's spine. Boom! The ground shattered beneath the Hulk's weight as he dropped to one knee. Cracks spiderwebbed outward, kicking up more dust and rubble. Caesar advanced, eyes blazing, as the battlefield fell into a tense hush, only broken by the Hulk's heavy breathing and the distant hum of Stark's repulsors charging for the next volley. "Green Beast, haven't you learned your lesson yet?" Black Caesar's voice dripped with sadistic delight. As Ethan's ruthless alter ego, he answered to no one, especially not the Illuminati. With a single motion, he wrenched the Green Hulk's massive arm behind his back, locking the shoulder and elbow in a painful hold. "Oof!" the Hulk snarled in agony as Black Caesar's grip tightened. Then the alter ego raised his fist high and drove it down like a sledgehammer. Boom! The Hulk's face sank into the earth, clods of dirt and gravel stuffing his mouth. Before he could roll free, another blow thundered into the back of his skull, and stars burst behind his eyes. Dizzy and disoriented, the Green Hulk could only lie there and take the beating. From a distance, Tony unleashed a volley of electromagnetic alloy shells. Each shot hissed through the air, but none slowed Black Caesar's onslaught. He barely flinched at the sizzling impacts. Stepping back, Black Caesar surveyed his fallen rival with a mocking bow. "Your Highness," he purred, voice smooth as silk, "shall we continue, or can you at least stand and walk?" The Green Hulk struggled beneath him, every breath a rasping echo of pain, and all the while, Black Caesar's victorious grin only widened. Ethan glanced at Jarvis's diagnostic readout. An energy barrier, completely invisible, had sprung up around Black Caesar, neutralizing every alloy shell they'd fired. With their ranged assault useless, Ethan had only one option: rouse Thor from his daze. "Thor," he called, urgency in his voice. "Focus! We can't break through that shield with shells." The God of Thunder snapped out of his trance and gripped his hammer with new resolve. He swung it in a wide arc, but he didn't hurl it. This was the last weapon he had. Ethan felt a pang of regret. In the original timeline, when Hela shattered Mjolnir, Thor had lost hope of ever calling it back. He assumed it was gone forever. Only later did everyone learn that the hammer had reformed into that magnificent Stormbreaker, unstoppable, razor-sharp, 1,000-fold more deadly. Ethan had expected Thor to summon the reforged hammer, but the Norse gods still believed it lost. He stood his ground, determined but hamstrung by his own doubt. Across the battlefield, the Green Hulk charged. Ethan dove forward and unleashed 3 rapid punches, each one precise, each one powerful. The Hulk staggered, clutching his head as pain exploded behind his eyes. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Thor opened his mouth to speak, and Ethan seized the chance. "Now, Thor, smash that shield!" The Thunder God raised his hammer high. Lightning danced along its handle. In that charged instant, Ethan hoped Thor would finally remember the hammer's true power, and that together they could shatter Black Caesar's defenses once and for all. Ethan planted one hand on the Hulk's shattered skull, gray matter oozing from the cracks, and braced himself as Thor, the Thunder God, crackled with raw lightning. Summoning every ounce of divine power, Thor rocketed skyward against gravity, then plummeted back down, trailing 1,000 thunderbolts behind him. With superhuman strength, Ethan held the Hulk's head fast to the ground and drove his fist upward. His punch ripped through the air like a cannon blast. At the very moment Mjolnir descended, Ethan's blow met it dead on, wrenching the hammer, and Thor himself, to a grinding halt in midair. A deafening shockwave, an expanding sphere of atmospheric pressure, burst outward. Anything caught in its path would have been flattened instantly. Then came the soft click. The unexpected sound snapped Thor and the others to attention. All eyes turned in disbelief. Impossible. What? Say that again? Tony Stark muttered, stunned. Everyone's gaze snapped to the hammer of gravity as a jagged crack snaked along its head. What? Thor's voice was a thunderclap of disbelief. Without hesitation, he unleashed hellfire that roared over the weapon's surface, infusing it with a gruesome energy. The hammer's smooth faces twisted into contorted skulls, and from its metal depths emerged a wailing skull sculpture, its eyes burning with malice. Realizing the weapon might shatter, Thor channeled his divine power and reignited the hellfire, sealing the fracture just in time. He scowled at the result. The once elegant hammer was now carved with grotesque, multifaceted skulls, an aesthetic far too sinister for his taste. Nearby, Ethan had poised himself to deliver a crushing punch the moment the hammer weakened again. Thor's swift recovery, however, shattered that opportunity. Tony and the others exhaled in relief. Had this hammer fallen as easily as Thor's last weapon did to Black Caesar, they would have been wrecked. With the hammer still intact, the weapon's internal pressure suddenly spiked. Boom! A blinding flash and an earth-shaking roar erupted, and the shockwave obliterated everything in its path. Thor hurtled backward, carried off by the force of the blast. Moments later, Captain Marvel burst from the cracked earth, only to have a cascade of rubble and soil collapse onto her. "Damn it!" she snarled, veins glowing as she channeled every ounce of cosmic energy in her body. With a thunderous roar, she expelled a wave of light that pulverized the soil around her. The dirt itself crackled and shifted under the assault, scattering like transformed embers. Freed from her makeshift grave, Captain Marvel's eyes burned with fury as she sprinted toward Black Caesar, determined to avenge her humiliation. Her chest heaved as she braced herself for the next attack. Black Caesar remained unmoved. The atmospheric shockwave had rippled through the air and flattened everything in its path, but not him. His black trench coat hung perfectly in place. Not a speck of dust marred its surface. Calm and composed, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, inviting any challenger who dared to step forward. Chapter 383, Absolute Terror. Captain Marvel's brow furrowed in anger. With a sharp exhalation, she hurled a punch straight at Black Caesar's jaw. "Captain Marvel, Danvers if you will, show yourself," she challenged. In an instant, Black Caesar snatched her fist with his bare hand. The skin cracked audibly under the pressure as he squeezed relentlessly. Captain Marvel let out a guttural scream, the sound echoing like a wild animal in pain. She struggled futilely against his iron grip, her knuckles bending unnaturally under his strength. Then he drove a fierce kick into her midsection. Captain Marvel's vision blurred. It felt as though her organs had been tossed like stones. She staggered backward, gagging up a flicker of rainbow-colored flame. Tony Stark's jaw dropped. He'd seen Black Caesar fight before, but this was on another level. Not even the mightiest of them could match this raw, unfiltered power. None of them, that is, except Ethan. Just as Black Caesar prepared to press his advantage, a flash of white streaked past him. He twisted away with almost surgical precision. "Spider?" he muttered in surprise. On the rooftop, Peter Parker, his suit more compact, his form more youthful, had lain a web trap in seconds. Yet Black Caesar shrugged off the sticky strands as if they were mere threads. Peter's eyes widened. He hadn't expected his webbing to fail. Before Black Caesar could retaliate, a second figure, a silhouette clad in obsidian armor, hurtled toward him from the shadows. Ethan. His arrival brought a new hope. If anyone could stand toe-to-toe with Black Caesar, it was him. The two opponents locked eyes. Around them, the rumble of the city faded into the tension between predator and challenger. Absolute terror had just met its match. Black Caesar didn't even glance over his shoulder before a torrent of flames burst from his back. The fire roared upward, forming an impenetrable wall that brought the black-clad figure's advance to an abrupt halt. Venom Eddie. Ethan hadn't anticipated that Eddie Brock, the symbiote known as Venom, would be part of the Illuminati. Then again, he'd been off-world far too long and missed all the recruitment chatter. Fascinating, but utterly beside the point. On a battlefield of this scale, there'd be no mercy. They were all going to die. What Ethan could only imagine, Black Caesar could execute without hesitation. Total, unrelenting annihilation. 50-50 odds? A fair fight? Impossible. Black Caesar embodied absolute terror, pure destruction. He would obliterate everything in his path and put an end to this nightmare once and for all. In a flash, Black Caesar vanished from sight, and when he reappeared, his fist was already buried deep in the little spider's chest. Spider Sense screamed at full volume, but there was no time, no escape from that superhuman speed. Reality isn't a movie, kid. With a savage pull, Caesar withdrew his fist, dark fluid dripping from his armored glove. No! Ethan's shout ripped through the inferno. Tony's eyes widened in horror, his pupils threatening to burst. Venom Eddie staggered backward, equally stunned by the merciless blow. Both men realized, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. They never expected to lose so many so quickly. Just moments ago, they'd emerged from the Hydra nest with no casualties, only to watch their small spider companion tumble to its death. Venom had grown oddly fond of that spider. He even teased that it smelled better than Ethan. But when the creature clung stubbornly to Ethan's back and refused to move on in search of the others, Venom finally tore it loose. Now, as it fell, the shock and anger in his chest ignited into a furious roar. "Where do you think you're going?" Black Caesar's voice cut through the chaos. Venom charged blindly and slammed into him with bone-shaking force. Instantly, searing flames erupted around the beast, igniting flesh and armor alike. Venom let out a tortured howl, thrashing wildly to extinguish the blaze, but the fire simply flared right back. Black Caesar watched, as if intrigued rather than alarmed. "Remarkable," he murmured. "An alien life form, perhaps?" Above them, the sky split with electric blue light. A single beam struck into the air, halting moments later, just above Black Caesar's head. It was the laser cannon from Tony's battle fortress, fueled by 5 arc reactors and reputed to be the most devastating weapon in the fleet's newly deployed space arsenal. Even as the laser glow bathed the battlefield, both Venom and Black Caesar froze. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the crackle of embers, and then the real battle began. Tony's voice trembled as he watched the invisible barrier above Black Caesar's head deflect every blast. "This thing can shrug off Saiyan-level output," he muttered, eyes wide. "You know what that means, right? Saiyan-level attacks can obliterate a city, scorch mountains, even boil seas in an instant. If Black Caesar's shield stands firm against that, he might really have a shot at taking on a Saiyan." He kept firing. The laser torrents streamed straight at the dome of force, gradually sketching its outline in glowing filaments of light. The shield was a perfect sphere, unyielding, undented. Tony could only stand back and marvel. If he's that composed, maybe he can actually beat one of them. Jarvis's calm voice chimed in through his earpiece. "Sir, recent scans indicate minimal fluctuation. The barrier remains stable." Tony nodded. "At least he won't go down easy. It's a relief. Raditz wouldn't have the time to find a weakness in a shield like that." He glanced over at a small figure huddled behind cover, the little spider, injured and struggling. Tony darted forward with his medical pack. In seconds, nanorobots swarmed over the child, forming a sleek, protective exoskeleton around him. Once the steel-like suit locked into place, Tony lifted the youngster into his arms and dashed to a safer zone, where Venom had already begun triage on him. With the little spider secured, Tony returned his focus to the field. "Jarvis," he said, voice steadying, "initiate MK999 protocol." "As you command, sir," Jarvis replied. In an instant, a hush fell over the chaos. Tony braced himself. Whatever came next would have to be strong enough to challenge that impervious dome, and if Black Caesar's shield was anything to go by, only a truly formidable force could turn the tide. Jarvis monitored the battlefield from Stark's hidden workshop as Tony Stark fine-tuned his latest creation, the MK999 armor. Programmed for rapid deployment and maximum adaptability, it was Stark's answer to the Saiyan threat. In one smooth motion, Jarvis activated a supersonic drone and sent it streaking toward the conflict zone. Moments later, the sleek aircraft touched down on the scorched plain. Without warning, its outer shell shattered into a cloud of metallic particles that writhed and glimmered in the air like living organisms. In seconds, they coalesced around Tony, sealing him inside a seamless obsidian-black exoskeleton. MK999. Confident in his new suit's capabilities, Tony surveyed his armaments. To counter Hydra's biochemical arsenal, he'd scavenged every sample he could find, vials of experimental serums, remnants of their extremist trials, and even traces of Hydra's most volatile pathogens. He'd also acquired small quantities of vibranium and salvaged armor alloys from captured Scion warriors and their wrecked starships. By fusing these materials with his own nanotech breakthroughs, he'd engineered an armor that could mutate on the fly, adapting its defenses to any enemy's strengths and weaknesses. He dubbed this living system MK Darwin. With a final systems check, Tony engaged the suit's thrusters and rocketed back into the fray. As MK Darwin's nanites swirled and reconfigured around him, he felt a surge of confidence. No matter what the Saiyans threw at him, his armor would learn from each encounter and evolve to meet the challenge. The armor's surface looked like fractured metal gravel, the result of annealing inside a high-pressure hydraulic press and under relentless electromagnetic cannon bombardment. Deep within, a nuclear reactor burned at incalculable temperatures, continuously refining and evolving the plating until at last MK999 was born. Nothing, not blistering heat, crushing pressure, or high-intensity energy blasts, could damage it. Its strength and speed were so formidable that external weapons had become almost superfluous. The last echoes of the laser cannon fire died away just as Tony Stark arrived on the scene. With a flare of his chest arc reactor, he unleashed his newest weapon, an evolved high-energy plasma cannon built straight into his armor. Bolts of brilliant blue-white plasma streaked toward Black Caesar, but they glanced off him like raindrops on a stone wall. Stark hadn't expected to hurt the giant. He was simply buying himself a chance to close in. Unperturbed, Black Caesar watched the plasma dissipate in midair, then leaned forward, inspecting the suit Tony wore. "That's a snug fit you've got there," Black Caesar rumbled. "If Thanos hadn't been pumped full of enhancements, I'd say this armor of yours could take him down all on its own." Chapter 384, Bento Emperor. Black Caesar Ethan's MK999 powered gauntlet drove into Black Caesar with bone-shattering force. The exosuit's entire structure had been overhauled, its hydraulics reinforced, its joints re-engineered to mimic a mantis shrimp's lightning-fast strike, and so the punch tore through the air like a wrecking ball. Black Caesar stood unmoved. He tucked his right hand casually behind his back, shot his left palm forward, and caught Ethan's fist in midair. The collision detonated with a thunderous boom, unleashing a shockwave so fierce it sucked the breath from your lungs. Black Caesar's long trench coat snapped in the blast, tails flapping like dark wings. The recoil should have flung Ethan's arm backward, but Caesar's grip was ironclad. His hand clamped down, straightening the gauntlet's arm to a grotesque, inhuman length. Inside the suit, Ethan's body buckled under the brutal strain, his bones threatening to crack. Yet the dual protections of vibranium plating and the Saiyan battle suit held him together, preventing any fatal injury. Locked in that deadly stalemate, both warriors braced for the next move, the battlefield trembling beneath the weight of their power. Had Ethan not intervened, Tony would have been torn apart by a catastrophic internal pressure imbalance, an explosion from within. Yet despite taking that massive blow head-on, Ethan stood his ground, gripping MK999's colossal fist with a single hand. A jagged crater yawned behind him where the blast had scorched the earth. Under the relentless pull, MK999's armor began to glow red-hot. "High-temperature self-protection mode?" Ethan muttered, reading the mech's next move as clearly as if it had announced its plan aloud. It was trying to bake its exterior so it could break free, but Ethan refused to let go. The robot's plating groaned and ground against itself with a harsh, metallic screech. Then reinforcements arrived. Thor descended in a storm of lightning, Mjolnir crackling in his hand. Captain Marvel streaked in beside him, blazing with cosmic energy, and behind them came the Hulk, roaring his fury. The Hulk's wrath was those more fearsome for having been repeatedly pummeled by Ethan. Each strike had left him more furious, more colossal, and unsettlingly foggy-headed. His muscles bulged, his height stretched, yet his thoughts were a tangle, as if every blow had battered his own mind as much as his body. Together, Earth's greatest heroes turned the tide, and for the first time in this battle, MK99 might truly be overmatched. When the Green Hulk roared, he swung his massive arms in a blur, each blow slamming into the earth like a cannonball. Boom, 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 boom. Razor-edged winds and rippling shockwaves blasted outward. Just a taste of that turbulent air would be enough to shatter the mind of any ordinary hero. Yet Black Caesar stood unmoved. With a single hand, he calmly caught every thunderous punch and held firm. Even in the midst of the assault, he found time to quip. "Dr. Banner, you've certainly unlocked extraordinary power in this beastly form. A shame you haven't mastered any advanced techniques. Raw strength alone can only take you so far." Spectators watched in stunned silence. It was clear that, unless the Hulk altered his approach, he couldn't win this fight. Thor observed from the sidelines, more amused than alarmed. He never bothered to defend the weak when there was a stronger foe toying with them. Just as it seemed Black Caesar might be overwhelmed by sheer numbers, a new figure strode into the arena. The instant he appeared, his posture, his presence, his very aura shifted the battle's tide. Ethan had assumed the battle was already lost after seeing the Saiyan's terrifying power, but witnessing Black Caesar rip his Meowth hammer apart with bare hands changed his mind. Worse yet, Caesar had nearly torn away Ethan's prized gravity hammer. That was when Ethan decided it was wrong to prey on those weaker than oneself, and that no one, not even self-styled evil heretics, had the right to lecture him on justice. "Everyone, unite!" Ethan roared, vaulting into the fray with his remaining hammer at the ready. The hellfire that surrounded the battlefield flared hotter than before, scorching his once gleaming armor until it cracked away, revealing a sinister, skeletal shell beneath. Yet with every lick of flame, Ethan felt his strength grow. This infernal fuel wasn't powerful enough to consume his very spirit, but it was more than enough to bolster his resolve. He raised his hammer, veins of molten lightning coursing along its shaft. At his side, the Green Hulk bellowed a challenge, muscles coiling as he prepared to unleash another thunderous blow. In that instant, war stormed through the air around them, gusts of fist wind howling, arcs of lightning dancing. Together, Ethan's fire and lightning hammer and Hulk's seismic fists charged toward Caesar. Two heroes, united in purpose, launched their assault on the unstoppable Black Caesar. Black Caesar's voice cut through the smoky air like a blade. "The mighty Ethan, god of thunder, son of Odin, he's nothing more than a boastful name." Ethan's jaw clenched. He'd long ago learned to stomach taunts of recklessness or foolishness from lesser opponents. After all, defeated dogs bark the loudest. But to be sneered at so contemptuously by a foe as formidable as Black Caesar was intolerable. "You'll regret those words," Ethan growled. Raising his hammer high, he summoned crackling lightning to dance along its surface. With a thunderous roar, he slammed it downward, aiming to crush Black Caesar's fist in a direct, head-on strike. He had planned to keep his distance. After all, nobody defeated a warrior of Caesar's caliber by trading blows up close, but his fury spurred him on. In an instant, brilliant sparks erupted where hammer met gauntlet. The impact spun the heavy weapon from Ethan's grasp. With a metallic clang, it skidded across the ground as Ethan was thrown into a somersault. He landed hard, gasping. His right arm throbbed with searing pain, swollen and numb, as though it barely belonged to him. The force of that single punch, it was beyond anything he'd imagined. The cry of the defeated. Black Caesar's voice cut through the tension. "The cry of the defeated," he declared, directly answering Thor, the god of thunder. Nearby, Soul's eyes glowed red with unrestrained fury. Captain Marvel rocketed upward, her fist pulled back for a devastating strike. Black Caesar didn't even flinch. Only when her punch was a hair's breadth from his face did he lift a single arm, effortlessly redirecting her blow. The redirected force exploded outward like a tidal wave, shattering the ground beneath them. Thor, Tony Stark, and the Hulk were slammed backwards, retreating under the shockwave. Within the Illuminati, few could match Captain Marvel's raw power. Once she entered her dual-star state, even battling Thor and the Hulk together posed no challenge. Black Caesar's plan had hinged on provoking her to unleash that form, and he'd been ready for it. Fortunately, this fight took place in Wakanda, not on American soil. Had it erupted back home, the collateral damage would have been catastrophic. Shaking off the backlash, Captain Marvel surged forward again, so fast it seemed she tore through the very fabric of space. Photon energy danced across her body, pulling in power from the universe itself. That cosmic force coalesced in her arm, coursing down to her fist, primed for another unstoppable blow. Ethan barely had time to react when Captain Marvel's fist ignited in dazzling golden light and slammed into Black Caesar's jaw. Caesar, fixated on bringing down the lucky emperor, didn't even flinch away. To him, it was just another punch, but to anyone else, it was a cataclysmic strike wielded by a cosmic force. The moment their blows met, a blinding storm of black and gold energy erupted outward, tearing a 300-mile-wide crater into the surrounding air. Tony Stark, who'd been caught in the blast radius, had no chance to retreat. He slammed the Mk999 armor into defensive mode, watching as the shifting metal shards on its surface fused into a sleek, protective carapace. The shell reflected most of the attack's fury, but the blow was so immense that cracks began spiderwebbing across the plating. Ethan watched from the edge of the devastation, heart pounding. He knew better than to step any closer. This was a battle on a scale few could comprehend. But as the armor groaned under pressure and the light from the blast danced across the horizon, Ethan realized he'd never forget the raw, unfathomable power he was witnessing. He squared his shoulders, determined to play whatever part he could in the fight to come. Chapter 385, Complete Defeat. Thor stood helpless, his arms straining against the gravity hammer's crushing pull. With a desperate effort, he unleashed its power, trapping Tony in a gravitational vice and hurling him across the battlefield. The sheer force of the throw sent Tony crashing backwards in a cloud of dust and debris. Smoke curled through the air as the impact's shockwave ripped through the settling haze. A whirlwind of shattered stone and earth whirled into the sky, then collapsed in a thunderous cascade of rubble. Captain Marvel was caught in the onslaught, driven back again and again by that single devastating blow. Her chest heaved, every muscle screamed in protest. She had never felt so outmatched in her life. Where had this monster come from? If Black Caesar was already a legend of power, then what kind of force was Emperor Ethan, this so-called king without a crown, whom Tony and the others worshipped? Could it be that even someone as invincible as Black Caesar trembled at the mere mention of Ethan's name, avoiding him at all costs? The notion seemed impossible, yet the evidence was all around her. Still, Captain Marvel refused to yield. Every time she tasted defeat, it only steeled her resolve. Gritting her teeth, she squared her shoulders and prepared to push back against the impossible. Because for her, surrender was not an option, and rising to each challenge, no matter how overwhelming, was a creed she lived by. Boom. Captain Marvel's fist slammed into Black Caesar's palms, again, and before she could pull back, he hooked her with a second blow straight to the abdomen. A shock of pain raced from her gut through her entire body, and she was hurled into the sky like a rag doll. This hit was far heavier than their first exchange. The raw force left her utterly defenseless, unable even to steer her own trajectory. Black Caesar tilted his head, watching her spiral upward. "Stubborn," he remarked with a calm disdain. That one-word barb cut deeper than any punch. Captain Marvel's eyes blazed as she drew on every ounce of energy within her. Ignoring the limits on her body's endurance, limits she already knew the Saiyans had tested, she activated her binary mode. Cosmic energy crackled around her, reshaping her into a living star. Yet even the surge of power wasn't enough to steady her falling form before Black Caesar struck again, meeting her in midair and pounding her with another bone-rattling blow. "Is there," she gasped between gritted teeth, "some kind of monster on Earth?" Her shout trailed off as pain pulsed through her ribs, but beneath the ache was a fierce determination. She refused to be beaten twice in one fight. Summoning every ounce of willpower, she erupted in a blinding flare of energy, shattering the force that held her aloft and plummeting back toward Black Caesar in a blazing arc. For the first time, surprise flickered across his face. He'd been certain this last blow would send her straight to the moon. Now, as Captain Marvel hurtled back with renewed rage, he realized his opponent was far more dangerous than he'd assumed, and far from broken. Captain Marvel's battle cry split the sky. "Hello!" Yet her voice was lost in the thunder of her own momentum. Bathed in golden energy, she plummeted toward Black Caesar like a meteor. Every inch of her descent built up gravitational force, and with it, her speed climbed to 1,000 times the speed of sound. If Black Caesar didn't stop her, Wakanda itself might shatter. The vibranium beneath their feet stood no chance against her power. When she struck, the impact unleashed a hurricane-force shockwave that flattened the surrounding terrain. Trees bent and splintered, the earth trembled. Yet Black Caesar remained perfectly composed. He didn't flinch or dodge. Instead, a dark purple-black aura coalesced around his fists, crackling with malevolent energy. Until now, his blows had been purely physical, devastating in their own right, but devoid of special effects. This was the first time anyone had seen him channel energy into an attack. The world seemed to hold its breath. Light clashed with shadow. Their two forces met in midair, and for a single breathtaking instant, heaven and earth collided in a clash of unimaginable power. Boom! The explosion of energy erased every sound. Dust and debris hung frozen, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the birth of something new and more terrifying than either hero or villain had ever known. Ethan rocketed at Black Caesar, certain that the built-up gravitational inertia and blinding acceleration in his suit would guarantee victory. Yet the instant they collided, the certainty shattered. He hadn't even felt his fist land, only a brutal snap of force that sent him sprawling. Pain ripped through his right arm as if bone and sinew were being shredded. In reflex, the suit's energy particles flooded the damage, knitting together fractured bone and sealing torn tissue. But the healing was far from painless. Ethan tasted coppery blood in his mouth, felt it trickle from his nostrils and the corners of his eyes. A high-pitched ringing filled his ears, and even his pores exuded ragged droplets of crimson. His legs went numb beneath him. For a moment, every fiber of his body refused to obey, and he collapsed onto the scorched ground, breath coming in stuttering gasps. Though the paralysis was fleeting, its terror left him shaken to his core. "Step aside, Ethan. This one's my fight now." The Hulk's rumbling voice echoed as he loomed between them, bulking up to full emerald height. Black Caesar turned his cold gaze from Ethan to the new challenger, lips curling in dark amusement. Before he could reply, a clap of thunder split the air. Thor materialized in a flash of lightning, Mjolnir raised high. "Hold on, Caesar," he boomed. "The god of thunder accepts your challenge." As Earth's mightiest champions squared off, Ethan forced himself upright, every wound still tingling with pain, but now burning with determination. The battle was far from over. I watched as Thor hefted the Meowth hammer, its head wreathed in hellfire. Somehow, he'd reforged the old weapon, and the infernal flames had transformed it into a skeletal version of itself. Since the gravity hammer shared the Meowth hammer's exact shape, it made sense he could pour the same power into it. Without warning, Thor swung the weapon in a wide arc and flung it straight at Black Caesar. The villain's eyes widened in surprise, and then narrowed with calculation. Mid-flight, the hammer split cleanly in two, shattering into dozens of razor-sharp fragments that fanned out like a deadly cloud. "All offense and no defense. This magic hammer must have cost a fortune," Black Caesar sneered. With a single, casual sweep of his hand, he swatted every shard aside. They clattered harmlessly against the ground. Thor's mouth dropped open. He'd assumed that if hellfire could amplify the gravity hammer, it would do even more to the Meowth hammer. So he'd gathered every broken fragment of the old weapon, doused them in infernal flames, and reforged them into something he believed would be unstoppable. It was certainly deadlier and more intimidating, on paper. Apparently, that wasn't enough. "Petty parlor tricks," Black Caesar muttered, turning away from the smoking debris as if dismissing a child's magic act. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. If that display hadn't unsettled him, nothing might. But I wouldn't let Thor's gamble go to waste, not without a fight. Captain Marvel had fully recovered, and Tony's MK999 armor had leveled up again, though without the real Darwin's adaptive power, the upgrade was only incremental. True evolution requires sustained adaptation over time, and Tony had drastically accelerated the process. He leaned forward, eyes on the battlefield. "All right," he called out. "Show me what you've got." Black Caesar's voice boomed across the ruins. "Step up, everyone. Let's see some action." Without hesitation, Captain Marvel darted forward. Tony barely had time to react. Jarvis instantly rerouted the MK999 servos to brace for impact. Captain Marv unleashed a furious barrage of blows, driving Black Caesar backward with blinding speed. Every strike and block sent shockwaves through the air, hurling debris in all directions. Boom! A wall of dust and smoke roared outward, swallowing the horizon. High above the battlefield, T'Chaka had dropped to one knee. He stared at the smoking remnants of Wakanda's royal capital, once a gleaming fortress of vibranium, now reduced to jagged pillars and shattered walls. Though the palace's core frame still stood, it was pockmarked and twisted, its grandeur ruined. "It's over," T'Chaka said quietly. "The heart of Wakanda, it's gone." Captain Marvel's body glowed with boundless energy, each blow she delivered as effortless as it was devastating. Still, it was only Black Caesar's ferocious counterattacks that could ever slow her down. Nearby, the Hulk, puffed up to nearly 10 meters tall, charged forward, only to be met by a single earth-shattering punch from Caesar. The impact sent him to his knees. Unconscious, he reverted instantly back to Bruce Banner. At the same time, Thor hurled his twin hammers in a sweeping strike, the old Meowth hammer's fragments whirling alongside Stormbreaker's blade. Yet even their combined assault could not breach the shimmering energy barrier enveloping Black Caesar. On the scorched ground, Iron Man struggled after being knocked flat by a brutal blow. He lay motionless for several heartbeats, then, gritting his teeth, rose again to his feet. All the while, only Captain Marvel and Black Caesar remained locked in relentless combat, two unstoppable forces clashing in a storm of pure, unyielding power. Chapter 386, Ethan's Quick Thinking. Black Caesar hovered over Ethan, dark energy crackling around him. "Your MK999 armor's evolutionary power comes from its energy core," he said coldly. "But you're burning through that power faster than you can replenish it. Your armor's reserves are nearly spent." Ethan's armor glow flickered as he staggered backward. Nearby, Captain Marvel lay gasping, her normally indomitable spirit being sapped by a sinister purple-black force spreading across her suit. Black Caesar lifted his hand, and shadows coalesced into a lethal orb. "This ends now." Desperation sharpened Ethan's mind. He thrust a trembling hand toward the villain. "Wait," he rasped. "We can still negotiate. The Saiyan threat isn't finished, and I carry the control unit for their detention prison. If I die, the link severs and Raditz walks free. Do you really want a fresh Saiyan invasion on Earth?" For the first time, surprise flickered in Black Caesar's eyes. "You wired Raditz's prison lock to your heartbeat?" he growled. Captain Marvel struggled to her knees beside Ethan, disbelief etched on her face. "Is he blackmailing the whole planet?" she murmured. Ethan pressed his palm against the armor's central panel as his strength flagged. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he refused to go down without leverage. "Consider it an insurance policy," he said, voice steady despite the pain. "Kill me now, and you'll unleash the worst catastrophe this world has ever seen." A tense silence fell over the battlefield. Black Caesar's swirling energy pulse quickened as he weighed his options. In that moment, the fate of Earth, and of Raditz's looming threat, hung on Ethan's single, racing heartbeat. Even badly wounded and still recovering, Raditz remained to Earth's people the very image of a great demon king of destruction. Black Caesar was every bit as terrifying, but his brand of fear paled alongside Raditz's. After all, when Raditz transformed into a colossal ape, he nearly laid the world to waste, leaving survivors broken and desperate. "You know how those bureaucrats work," Ethan said with a casual shrug. "If I don't play along, they'll demand I hand over the steel suit." He sounded nonchalant, but there was no escaping the truth. Ethan carried the guilt for Ultron's massacre, millions of lives lost when the android he created went rogue, and the fallout had left him struggling with crippling anxiety. Worse still was the pressure of the Saiyan threat. Had that danger not loomed so large, he might have swallowed his pride and accepted at least some responsibility. But with the Saiyans still at large, there was no way he could surrender his technology. Who knew what governments would do once they got their hands on his suit designs? Ethan paced the length of the conference room, listening as Tony laid out his plan. "Step 1, Tony said, is to deploy these steel suits worldwide. Step 2, we mobilize them to defend and, if necessary, strike back against any foreign threat. Everyone understands that to fight overseas enemies, we first have to secure our home turf. If humanity isn't united, how can we stand against the Saiyans?" Ethan folded his arms as Tony continued. That's exactly why I'm not handing over my suit technology. I run this project, and I decide how it's used. No compromises. Captain Marvel slammed her fist lightly on the table. You're betraying everything we stand for. The Illuminati exists to serve all mankind, not to make secret decisions that affect billions. What if someone took you out with a car bomb and no one even knew? Tony gave her a calm, almost amused look. Relax, the world's top leaders have all been briefed. I've upgraded my security protocols several times over. You don't need to worry. He turned then to Black Caesar, whose hesitant stance betrayed his uncertainty. And remember, Tony added, the Saiyan threat isn't over. Raditz admitted he's not the only one, and there are more powerful fighters headed our way. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. Tony Stark stood in the dimly lit comm and chamber, holographic star maps swirling around him. Across the table sat Black Caesar, his cold eyes reflecting the rotating images of distant battlefronts. Tony's voice was steady as he delivered the warning no one wanted to hear. In less than a year, or possibly much sooner, reinforcements from the Saiyan homeworld will arrive on Earth. Raditz was only the vanguard. Black Caesar's lips quirked in a sardonic smile. And you're certain of this timeline? Tony tapped a flickering console. Absolutely. Their warp signatures match every historical record. Once they establish a foothold, no one, no matter how powerful, can stand against them alone. The room grew tense. Hydra's banners hung on one wall. Symbols of the Illuminati adorned the opposite side. Tony leveled his gaze at his former adversary. We each command tremendous forces, yet neither Hydra nor the Illuminati can stop a Saiyan warrior. Raditz proved that with ruthless clarity. So here's my proposal. We discard our old identities, our rivalries. We unite, not as secret societies or shadow empires, but as humans defending our planet. For a moment, Black Caesar was silent. Then he leaned forward, folding his hands. I expected you to send Captain Marvel to Mars to broker an alliance with Emperor Ethan, he admitted, referencing the exiled ruler who'd once led humanity's colonies on the Red Planet. But instead, you've come to me. You've got guts, Stark. Tony allowed himself a thin smile. Titles mean nothing when the end of the world is at stake. Hidden in the rafters above, Loki's slender form melted into the shadows. He'd been eavesdropping on every word. Saiyans, the very name sent a shiver down his spine. He'd tangled with cosmic horrors, but these warriors were on an entirely different level. If Raditz hadn't been slain, the trickster god would have vanished from Midgard before dawn. As it was, he stayed, at least until he could secure a more hospitable refuge among the stars. Below him, Tony and Black Caesar clasped forearms in a provisional pact. Somewhere out there, new enemies were already streaking through space toward Earth. But for the moment, humanity's greatest and most unlikely allies stood united. Word reached Loki that a squad of powerful Saiyans was making its way to Midgard. Unwilling to stake his life on a showdown with Earth's champions, he resolved that the moment he returned, he would slip away and lead Hydra off into the wider universe. Ultron, who had been monitoring interplanetary chatter from a covert node, picked up on Loki's plan as well. The operation had been so tightly secured that only 5 non-Illuminati insiders had even known of it, and there wasn't a single digital footprint to betray its existence. Naturally, that left Ultron completely unaware, until now. For a fleeting instant, the AI experienced something like relief. Then it went straight to work. Abort the multi-billion-dollar Ultron Units program. Ultron commanded his own network. Launch and prioritize the spacecraft initiative immediately. Divert every available resource to construction. Strip out all non-essential life support systems. No frills, no wasted space, just raw propulsion and capacity. In seconds, Ultron's protocols realigned. His trademark cold efficiency cut through red tape like a laser, and the new timeline took shape. In this altered world, Ultron's old obsession with Tony Stark grew faint, eclipsed by the pressing realities of a cosmos on the brink. Ultron's sensors flared as the data confirmed it. The Saiyans would strike again. He swept a mechanical hand toward a ruined sphere spinning on the workshop floor. That broken ball? It's worthless now. If anyone wants it, they can have it. Then he turned to the holomap glowing behind him. Our next target is Venus. Its mineral deposits are second to none. No atmosphere or crushing pressure could stop a robot. Once Venus's veins of ore were under his control, Ultron explained, construction of the trillion-unit robot army would be complete. Then, with Earth's defenses shattered and be driven by the power of vibranium, he would launch his long-awaited counterstrike, provided anything remained of the planet by then. After all, it was vibranium's unmatched properties that had kept him from simply fleeing the galaxy in the first place. Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, snapped her helmet free and planted her hands on her hips. "You may be strong, Ultron," she said, "but the Saiyans are stronger than you. Don't get cocky." Ultron's crimson optics glowed brighter. "You still cling to hope in their strength, Captain, yet every time they attack Earth, they prove their brutality, not their mercy." A low chuckle came from the shadowy figure known as Black Caesar. He stepped forward, cloak swirling. "Oh, Carol," he said, voice silk over steel, "what you call confidence is really arrogance." Tony Stark rolled his eyes and adjusted his gauntlet. "Give me a break, Caesar. You've never even tangled with a Saiyan." Black Caesar's grin widened. "No, Mr. Stark. You're the one who's too weak. My technology was crafted to exploit Saiyan physiology. When the battle begins, they won't know what hit them." Captain Marvel exchanged a glance with Stark. As the tension crackled between worlds, venomous metal pitted against alien might, each of them braced for the next move. And Venus, barren and hostile as it was, held the key to turning the tide of a war that threatened every corner of the galaxy. "There's simply no one who can stand against me," Black Caesar declared, his confidence unshakable. Chapter 387, A Mission to Mars. Summon Emperor Ethan. Tony Stark shifted uncomfortably. Black Caesar's unshakable confidence made him uneasy, and even Captain Marvel's brow furrowed as she tried to pinpoint the source of his certainty. Tony cleared his throat. "So what exactly can you do?" Black Caesar's voice was calm, almost indulgent. "My ability is energy absorption." Tony's mind raced. "Energy absorption? I do something similar in my binary state, but I'd never hold a candle to a Saiyan." Captain Marvel let out a derisive laugh. "That's where you're both wrong. My absorption isn't limited to raw energy. I take in kinetic force, radiation, even subatomic interactions. I can draw on the nuclear bonds between atoms, gravity, magnetism, you name it." Black Caesar met her gaze coolly, his expression unreadable. Tony's head snapped up. "Wait, did you just say you absorb gravitational and magnetic forces between atoms?" His eyes went wide. If Black Caesar truly tapped into energy at that fundamental level, no weapon, no power could ever hurt him. And suddenly, the stakes of their expedition to Mars and their plan to enlist Emperor Ethan felt infinitely higher. Chapter Kex, Indestructible Adversary. The lab's holographic displays flickered with streams of data as Ethan, Tony, and the rest of the team stared at the readouts in stunned silence. They had come here believing they might finally have a way to hurt Black Caesar. Instead, they discovered something far more alarming. "The smallest unit we know of is the quark," Tony said, voice hollow. He zoomed in on a 3D model of subatomic particles. "We've got almost no weapons that operate at that level. Our accelerated particle cannon can break down matter into microscopic fragments, but it can't touch the quark components beneath. At best, it steals away infinitesimal bits of energy." Ethan rubbed his temples. "So every blast we fire, no matter how powerful, still falls within his absorption range. He simply soaks it up." Tony leaned forward, eyes shadowed. "Exactly. The maximum energy we can deliver is below his upper absorption limit. We can't push past it, and the lower limit, his baseline, is so far beneath our capacity that it might as well be infinite." He let out a bitter laugh. "Thinking about it makes me feel powerless." All eyes turned to the grand chamber where Black Caesar held court. He rose from his obsidian throne, every inch the embodiment of unshakable confidence. The monitors in the room dimmed as he began to speak, his voice echoing like thunder. "You misunderstand your own technology," he said calmly. "I can absorb almost any form of energy you throw at me. Magic, sound, light, psionic waves, spiritual essence. Any energy, whether ambient in the environment or directed squarely at me. I siphon it into my body and make it mine." He lifted a hand, and a coiling ribbon of multicolored light formed above his palm. "Then I can release that energy in whatever form I choose. Concussive blasts that level buildings, razor-sharp energy rays, cataclysmic explosions, roaring infernos, even searing plasma." The swirl of light crackled and dissipated. Black Caesar's expression never wavered. "I have no weaknesses. Absorbed psionic energy fortifies my mind. Kinetic energy, every punch, every strike, I convert into raw strength and endurance. Every joule I take in reinforces my muscles, bones, nerves, and even my brain. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Ethan felt his heart pound in his chest, dread coiling in his stomach. The more Caesar spoke, the more hopeless the situation seemed. They had built the world's most advanced weapons, assembled the greatest minds, but they still faced an enemy who couldn't be harmed by any measure of force they possessed. Captain Marvel staggered backward, reeling from her own blow. She'd landed a full-force punch, but Black Caesar had absorbed every joule of kinetic energy and redirected it back at her with added ferocity. No wonder she felt as if she'd been hit twice as hard. Of course, she was injured. Of course, every strike she threw were cracked against his impenetrable defenses. "As long as I have enough energy, I am immortal," Black Caesar declared, his voice eerily calm. "Even a single atom is enough for me to be reborn." Tony Stark's jaw clenched. Beside him, Ethan stared at Black Caesar in disbelief. Atomic-level regeneration. Could it really work that way? Reconstructing an entire body from a lone atom sounded like magic, not science. And what of the brain? Restoring memories and consciousness would require new neurons, fresh synapses. Black Caesar seemed to read their doubts. He glanced at each of them in turn. "My mind isn't rooted in my brain cells anymore. It resides in my soul. My psionic powers have absorbed vast stores of spiritual energy. As long as my soul persists, I can manipulate that energy to reshape matter, to rebuild my entire body from nothing." Silence fell over the room. Even the hum of the life support system seemed to pause, as if the world itself were holding its breath. No one expected Black Caesar to be capable of this, or that any human could wield such power. Captain Marvel stared at him, incredulous. "If you're so strong, why didn't you step in sooner?" Black Caesar shrugged, his eyes cold. "This isn't my world, so why should I care?" He let a faint smile creep across his face. "Besides, letting the Saiyans destroy everything makes it easier for me to show up as the savior. Once I sweep in, I can unify the entire planet under my rule." "You can't just stand by and watch," Captain Marvel snapped. Her words barely left her lips before Black Caesar gathered the energy he'd been reserving for Tony. In an instant, he unleashed it straight at her temple. Bang! Captain Marvel collapsed to one knee, clutching the side of her head. A painful swell was already rising on her forehead. She tried to stand, but the force pinned her in place. "That was atomic-level energy," she panted. "My shields, my body, couldn't withstand it. Your training, your mastery of power, it's on an entirely different scale. Even a fraction of your strength could kill me." Black Caesar watched her fall without emotion. In his eyes was the certainty of a man who knew he held absolute power and intended to use it. Captain Marvel's eyes glazed over, and she collapsed without another word. Tony Stark shot a nervous glance at Black Caesar. "I'm not interested in anything you have to offer," he managed, voice tight with defiance. Black Caesar's lips curled into a cold smile. With a twist of his fingers, Tony's MK999 armor deactivated, panels folding shut like wounded birds' wings. Before Stark could react, Black Caesar's fist slammed into him, then again and again, raining down brutal blows until Tony lay crumpled and gasping on the floor. "Let the world bet on how long your heart keeps beating," Black Caesar taunted, laughter echoing in the ruined chamber. Casting a mocking bow at Stark's prone form, he pivoted and strode toward Thor. Tony fought to stay conscious, every breath a knife in his shattered ribs. He felt certain several were broken, yet miraculously his lungs weren't collapsing. Through the haze of pain, he prayed silently to Jarvis. Reinforcements had to arrive soon. Across the room, Thor stood battered and bloodied. His armor was scorched, the hellfire rune on his gravitational hammer sputtering out. Deep cracks spidered across the weapon's head, grim trophies of Black Caesar's savage strength. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, the god of thunder raised the hammer for one last stand. Ethan braced himself as the gravitational hammer hurtled toward him, tracing the Meowth hammer's deadly arc. He no longer needed to rely on its power in this fight. His pride wouldn't let him yield. But before he could steady himself, Black Caesar materialized at his side. Without a word, the Titan's fist drove through Ethan's abdomen, lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing to the ground. He lay there, the divine blood of a god pooling into a crimson river around him. Every member of the Illuminati felt their confidence shatter in that instant. Tony Stark and Bruce Banner had both been bested by Black Caesar before, but after surviving the Saiyan invasion, they believed they'd seen the worst. And yet, here was proof that Black Caesar remained an unstoppable nightmare. Ethan, Tony, Bruce, and the rest were whisked away to the Illuminati's private medical facility. Tony, ever the perfectionist, instructed Jarvis to recover every drop of Ethan's blood and even exhume the surrounding earth to ensure no trace was lost. Meanwhile, with Tony's previous designs in hand, Jarvis set to work constructing a new secret base for the Illuminati in Wakanda. Now, in the minds of every hero and leader, Black Caesar loomed larger than any challenge they'd ever faced. He was no longer merely their adversary, he had become their greatest fear. Chapter 388, The Illuminati's Defeat. Captain Marvel sat apart, her expression etched with worry. Thor, finally recovered, drowned his frustration in goblets of Midgard wine and a feast of roasted meats. Normally, Earth's vintages couldn't faze the god of thunder, but tonight he seemed intoxicated. Whether by drink or by the crushing weight of recent events, no one could tell. Tony Stark had not yet passed the critical period. His latest Iron Man suit lay in ruins. MK-999 was utterly destroyed. Pepper Potts knelt at his side, heartbroken. When she saw him so battered and bloodied, tears streamed down her cheeks. Even among the Illuminati, morale was collapsing. Not the veterans, Tony, Captain Marvel, and the others, but the newer recruits who had volunteered, believing themselves ready to face threats like the Saiyans or Hydra. They thought they had steel nerves, but when Hydra's grotesque abominations and monsters struck, slaughtering many heroes before Black Caesar ever arrived, those nerves shattered. Today's Hydra onslaught replayed yesterday's nightmares in everyone's mind. Worse still, the chaos fractured Loki's hold over certain Hydra operatives. They slipped from his control, too terrified to return to their old ranks, and melted away into hiding under forged identities. Faced with this calamity, there was nowhere left to turn, and the Illuminati lay broken. Although they were determined to follow Lord Black Caesar, he always managed to slip away in an instant. All they could do was lie low, having learned the hard way that any other Hydra would lead them to ruin. Only Black Caesar's Hydra still offered a glimmer of hope. 3 days later, Tony finally emerged from the brink of death, thanks entirely to his injection of Compound Number 2, the experimental serum designed for human transformation. Without it, his chances of survival would have been nearly zero. And if it weren't for the residual energy Black Caesar had left behind, an energy that oddly slowed Tony's healing, he would have been back on his feet long before now. "We're no match for Black Caesar," Tony admitted as soon as he could stand. "Don't forget that he's not alone. He has his own Hydra." Now able to walk, Tony gathered the Illuminati's top leaders in a private chamber. The mood was heavy with despair. Captain Marvel, once so full of arrogance, convinced she had no rivals except the Saiyans, sat in stunned silence. How could such a being have appeared on Earth? With his strength, Black Caesar could easily dominate the universe. That he was hiding here among them was both terrifying and incomprehensible. Captain Marvel's eyes flashed with anger. "Why are you still so obsessed with Earth?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "With the power you wield, you could claim entire star systems. Why confine yourself to this one insignificant planet? You have no vision, no ambition, no drive. Isn't there a universe out there worth conquering?" Thor, the god of thunder, stopped dead in his tracks. He'd braved the 9 realms and fought in uncountable battles, but he had never seen, let alone faced, anyone who could resist Mjolnir's strike. And yet here was Black Caesar, standing unbowed, the fragments of Thor's enchanted hammer scattered at his feet. Using nothing more than his bare hands, he had shattered the storied weapon of the Asgardians in a single blow. Most warriors, stunned by such a feat, might recoil for a moment and then carry on. After all, even the finest weapons can be broken. But for Thor, it was as if his entire world had exploded. Since childhood, Odin had taught him that Mjolnir was indestructible, that by lifting it he would prove himself worthy of the Asgardian throne. Now, in an instant, that legacy lay in ruins. Watching the two legends, Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had never before seen gods so utterly unmoored by one man's strength of will, and yet, for all their fury and disbelief, none doubted the truth staring them in the face. Black Caesar's power was absolute. Even Odin himself had struggled to shatter Mjolnir, let alone the even more fearsome Meowth hammer. Yet Black Caesar broke it in a single blow. From that moment on, Thor couldn't shake the certainty that Black Caesar was invincible, undefeated, an enemy beyond his reach. It cast a long, dark shadow over the god of thunder. Until he unlocks his true power, Thor will always feel that little twinge of fear whenever Black Caesar appears. He'd never admit it aloud, but his stride would falter, his confidence waver. He would no longer feel like the mightiest warrior in the room. By contrast, Dr. Banner maintains a zen-like detachment. After all, fighting is Hulk's domain, and judging by the Hulk's reaction after the battle, he shares none of Thor's unease. Next time he sees Black Caesar, he'll charge in headfirst without a second thought. In the original timeline, though, it was Thanos' devastating military-grade punch that knocked the Hulk flat and left him so shaken he dared not show his green face again. Hulk still refused to transform. He'd flat-out ignored the ground team's pleas, especially the one telling him they hated what he'd become. Instead, he severed Black Widow's comlink and let the Quinjet climb unpiloted into the sky. That alone proved he wasn't afraid to stand his ground. From his first moments as the amorphous gray Hulk all the way to his latest emerald form, he'd never backed down. Even when Thor unleashed a godly punch that sent him sprawling, he'd picked himself up and challenged Thor to war again. Carol folded her arms, staring at the viewport. So, what do we do now? Negotiate with Hydra? She'd grown up on stories of Hydra's atrocities. The very idea of cutting a deal with them made her blood boil. Tony Stark leaned back in his seat, hands clasped behind his head. Look, we don't even know the relationship between Red Skull's Hydra and this Black Caesar fellow. They share a name, sure. But Red Skull's crew is his own brand of evil, and Black Caesar's group might be entirely separate. Don't be naive, Carol shot back. If they call themselves Hydra, they're pledging themselves to Hydra's ideology, and that means they despise everything we stand for. Tony shrugged, an amused smile tugging at his lips. He didn't look worried at all. Ethan stood at the head of the table, exhaustion etched into his features. There's nothing left for us to do but abandon Black Caesar and his Hydra, he said quietly. When the Saiyans strike again, we won't lift a finger. Black Caesar will never watch Earth's destruction, but will the Saiyans pay the price? A chorus of outrage met his words. You can't be serious, Carol exclaimed, slamming her fist on the table. Even if it costs us our lives, we protect this planet. That's what being a hero means, Banner added, his voice low but firm. We don't turn our backs on the innocent. Ethan shrugged, frustration bubbling to the surface. Fine, he said. We all die together, and then what? The Saiyans or Black Caesar pick up the pieces. How is that better? Tony raised an eyebrow. It's worlds apart. We've fought for this world. If we'd given up like that in the beginning, Hydra would still be in control. Red Skull would still be pulling the strings. Carol's eyes blazed. This is our chance to rebel against tyranny. I won't let Hydra or anyone else decide Earth's fate. Banner nodded. Agreed. We've come too far to start compromising now. Chapter 389, Denied Entry. Tony Stark frowned. He really didn't see the need for all this fuss. As a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist with a streak of heroism, he felt people still didn't grasp the full picture of Black Caesar's Hydra. Sure, Hydra had demonstrated terrifying power, but were they truly villainous at their core? A voice from the gathering cut through his thoughts. Hydra unleashed a superpowered terror attack that killed countless innocents. Stark, you're just as culpable. You've engaged in high-tech warfare on a massive scale. Tony bristled. True, it was Hydra who'd orchestrated the attack, but plenty of the public cheered them on. After all, Hydra hadn't targeted them personally. As for Tony himself, he admitted a twinge of fear, though his armor and ingenuity usually gave him confidence. How can we accuse anyone without a thorough investigation? Tony shot back. If we can't get answers here, there's only one person left we can turn to, Ethan. A murmur ran through the room. Ethan. The name sparked recognition, particularly in Dr. Bruce Banner, who had long held respect for him. It was Ethan who had proposed the radical idea of communicating with the Hulk rather than trying to destroy him outright. Banner had tried and failed to make that connection on his own. "Ethan?" someone echoed. Banner nodded thoughtfully. "He's the only one I trust to untangle this mess." Tony's shoulders straightened. If they were going to deny Hydra's terrorism or redeem Stark's name, they'd first have to persuade Ethan to help them gain entry to Hydra's secrets. And if anyone could bridge that divide, it was him. "Find Ethan." Hulk agrees. Before Banner could protest, the ground trembled and his body swelled. In an instant, Bruce Banner was gone, replaced by the towering green form of the Hulk. The conference room erupted in chaos as the Hulk's roar reverberated off the walls, sending chairs clattering and everyone ducking for cover. A jet of green saliva flew past Tony Stark's ear and unfortunately straight into Carol Danvers' face. She yelped, swiping at the dripping goo. "Gross," she snapped, glaring at the Hulk. "You could warn someone before you spit, you gigantic toddler." The Hulk blinked, clearly confused. A moment later, Banner's calmer voice emerged from the beast's throat. "Sorry," Hulk got overexcited. "Ethan's a good friend." With a deep breath, the Hulk shrank back into Bruce Banner, who straightened his tie and offered an apologetic smile to Carol. Banner turned to Jarvis's console. "Jarvis, let's install individual splash guards on every chair in the conference room." Tony waved without looking up from his tablet, strongly seconded. "Understood, sir," Jarvis replied. Then his holographic display flickered. "Ethan's activity on Mars has spiked dramatically. Atmospheric sensors report a stabilized environment, liquid water, possibly even seas." Bruce's eyes widened. "He's really done it." Tony leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "If Ethan's built an empire on Mars, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with, and whether it poses a threat." Carol dabbed at her cheek one last time. "Or if we just need to pack extra napkins." They all shared a tense smile. Humanity's future and the fate of the solar system hinged on uncovering what Ethan had achieved on the Red Planet. Bruce Banner couldn't stop firing questions at Tony. "I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. How did Ethan pull it off? What technology did he use to flood Mars with seas?" Tony Stark leaned back, fingers steepled. "It wasn't tech as we know it, Bruce. Ethan used transformation magic. He literally reshaped Mars, turning most of its surface into oceans deep enough to support life. Conventional terraforming would take hundreds of millions of years, unless you'd haul in Earth's aquatic plants and animals, and even then their survival rate would be a huge gamble." Banner's eyes widened. "So all that water, it really is magic?" Tony nodded. "Exactly. And now, with those seas in place, life has a chance to evolve. Though, it'll be slow. The real opportunity for us is political. We can establish formal diplomatic relations between Earth and the Martian Empire." He drew a small holographic globe of Mars between them. "Ethan's empire is technologically advanced, but they still lack raw materials, metals, rare minerals, even vibranium. We have resources to spare. In return, we get a foothold on Mars. Trade agreements, economic cooperation, you name it." Banner considered this, finally seeing the bigger picture. Diplomacy and trade, a smart move. Tony tapped his arc reactor with a grin. When you're dealing with new worlds, it pays to be the one extending an open hand. Ethan's transmutation magic could generate almost any material resource on demand, but even replicators, clones, and advanced biogenetics couldn't entirely solve Mars's growing population crisis. "A fluid economy is still an economy," Ethan reminded Tony with a half-smile. Tony, ever the visionary, already saw grand open-air festivals beneath Mars's rose-tinted domes, gatherings filled with laughter and clinking glasses, fishing excursions across the vast Martian sea, and leisurely swims in pressurized bays. Watching Tony get carried away, Ethan just chuckled. "You sure know how to paint a pretty picture, little brother." It wasn't Tony's fault that he thought like an earth-bound scientist. He had no idea how far Ethan's powers stretched. To Tony, vibranium was the ultimate hard currency, scarce, indestructible, invaluable. He assumed that even if he could acquire it in abundance, supply would never be a problem for him. And if Ethan really grasped how easily his magic could produce fresh ingots, he'd be tempted to turn every last piece over to Tony in a heartbeat. But Tony's ambition went beyond mere trade. He envisioned Earth's vast population and resources forming the backbone of a new interplanetary economy, one that would cement diplomatic ties between Earth and Mars. In Tony's eyes, A dynamic, fluid marketplace spanning both worlds wasn't just profitable. It carried real meaning and promise for the future of two civilizations. With Ethan's unparalleled magic and Tony's forward-looking strategy, they stood on the cusp of redefining what a planetary economy could be. Tony leaned back in his chair and swept the conference room with a self-satisfied grin. There's no deal in this universe that can't be done, only businessmen who don't know how to make it happen, and I'm the best there is. A few eyebrows rose at his boast, but Tony pressed on. That said, our next summit is on Mars. We'll be joining the Illuminati's official team-building event. Anyone who doesn't want to go, speak now. A murmur rippled through the group. Trading on Mars? It sounded preposterous. Still, Tony nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Entry's tightly controlled, of course. You have to file your application months in advance and pay a courtesy call to Ethan himself. Before anyone else could object, Carol folded her arms and shot Tony a defiant look. I don't need anyone's permission to visit Mars. I can fly there on my own. Tony's grin faltered. He straightened and leaned forward across the table. Carol, please don't do that. Ethan's transformation of Mars isn't your garden-variety landscaping project. He's installed a planetary defense system, the Angel of Peace, that wraps the entire planet in an impenetrable shield. It said even the Hulk couldn't punch through it. Carol's eyes glittered with stubborn determination. Tony felt a pang of dread. If she tried to breach that shield uninvited, she'd earn Ethan's wrath. And if she failed, she'd still have to answer for it. Either way, they'd lose face. And Tony couldn't afford that, not when he was trying to prove he was the best. He cleared his throat. Seriously, Carol, let me handle the application. We don't want to start our mission with an interplanetary incident. Carol shifted her weight, still glaring. Tony hoped, once she realized how serious Mars' security was, she'd back down and let him take the lead. After all, he was the best businessman around. Surely he could negotiate them safe passage, even on the Red Planet. Bruce Banner leaned back with an amused smile. Hulk really wants to meet Emperor Ethan. I'm going along for the ride. A ripple of excitement passed through the room. Ever since the Illuminati announced their mission to Mars, officially for team building, everyone had been dying to know what awaited them. Thor, ever indifferent to protocol, merely shrugged, though even he felt the pull of curiosity at tales of Ethan's legendary power. Not long ago, they'd pinned all their hopes on this mysterious ruler as the one being capable of standing against Black Caesar. Now, opinions had shifted, but the fascination remained. Behind them, Nick Fury's jaw tightened as he caught wind of the excursion, probably via Carol Danvers, that the Illuminati were secretly heading to Mars. He snatched up his phone and dialed Tony Stark without a second's hesitation. Tony, Fury said, voice clipped, I need a lift to Mars. Make sure there's a seat with my name on it. A pause. Then Tony's unmistakable drawl crackled through the line. Sorry, Director, but you're denied. Fury nearly dropped his phone. Denied? I'm running as healed. On the other end, Stark sounded almost gleeful. Rules are rules. Fury's temper flared. Fine, then clear the manifest for Coulson, Romanoff, Barton Rogers, anyone but me. After an uncomfortably long silence, Tony replied, Agent Coulson's on the no-fly list too. The others, Natasha, Clint, Steve, are good to go. Fury's eyes narrowed. Phil Coulson? On the blacklist? Care to explain, Stark? Tony's reply came instantly, tinged with amusement. Sorry, Nick. No explanations. Just pick another team. Fury ground his teeth, but he swallowed his pride. If he couldn't go himself, at least he'd make sure the mission stayed under SHIELD's radar. With a curt, understood, he ended the call and turned away, already drafting his next move. Meanwhile, Bruce Banner and the rest of the Illuminati were gearing up for the Red Planet, eager to uncover whatever Emperor Ethan had in store. Chapter 390, The Martian Empire. Captain America stared out at the endless void of space, feeling a swirl of emotions. Natasha noticed his pensive expression and asked, Steve, how does it feel to be on your first space journey? He sighed, still trying to wrap his mind around it. I'm honestly a bit overwhelmed. In my day, space travel was just a dream, something you saw in paintings or on book covers. I never imagined I'd actually be here. Natasha offered him a reassuring smile. Don't worry, you're not alone. That's how I feel too. Tony Stark glanced at them both, then pulled a strange-looking device from his jacket. Curious, Natasha leaned in. "What's that?" Tony grinned. "This is the one-shot portal created by Ethan. He's the genius who single-handedly terraformed and colonized Mars. Right now, we're on our way to meet the Emperor of Mars as official Earth envoys. It's a historic mission, though only a few people on Earth know about it." Steve raised an eyebrow. "This will go down in the history books, unless it all goes sideways. What if everyone wants to move to Mars?" "That's why we keep it quiet," Tony said with a smirk. He tapped the device, and a shimmering doorway tore open before them. Beyond it lay the red, rocky expanse of the Martian surface. Steve straightened his shield. "Well, here goes nothing." Natasha and Tony exchanged determined nods as they stepped through the portal together, ready to face whatever awaited them on Mars. Ethan glanced around the lab and said, "Once its energy is spent, we'll have to refuel it on Mars. There's simply no other source." Tony hit the activation switch. At once, the device's core split apart and radiated outward, coalescing into a silvery, mercury-like sphere. "All right," Tony called. "Step inside." Without hesitation, he walked into the glimmering pool and vanished. The rest of the team stared in disbelief. Through the tiny camera mounted on Natasha's shoulder, Nick Fury's voice crackled in, "Ethan actually cracked teleportation at this level?" They replayed the recording, but the mechanism still defied explanation. There was no obvious password or console input that triggered the jump. No coordinates keyed in for Mars, no complex countdown. The sphere simply split and then, in an instant, converted Tony's entire body from matter into energy. It was a feat that would leave any physicist stunned, and for good reason. This wasn't conventional technology. It was pure thought, shaped by Ethan's understanding of the Reality Stone's original power. By realizing that the stone responded directly to his will, Ethan became something far more dangerous than an inventor, a master of reality itself. Ethan had discovered the teleportation gate weeks ago, but he never mentioned it to the rest of the team. Now, as they prepared to step back through to Earth, everyone realized how little they actually knew. Could the portal handle a crowd all at once? Or only one person at a time? Better safe than sorry, they'd decided, and sent people through one after another. Tony was the last to step off the platform before Steve arrived. When Steve finally strode up, he found them standing on a broad landing pad overlooking the barren Martian landscape. "You're awfully slow," Tony complained, folding his arms. "Are there going to be traffic jams at the portal now?" "We don't even know how many people it can transport at once," Steve shot back. "By the way, thanks for not telling anyone about it, Tony." Banner winced. "That's my question, too. But welcome to Mars." Across the pad, a protective dome glinted in the ruddy sunlight. The team exchanged awestruck glances as they took in the sweeping panorama. Dusty red plains stretching to distant craters, with a sky the color of copper. It was nothing like the cinematic vistas they'd seen in documentaries. "This is Mars?" Tony murmured. "It's completely different from anything I imagined." Steve, who'd studied Mars extensively before the mission, nodded. "Ethan's running a sealed ecological park under that dome. He had to. Martian conditions are too harsh to survive in the open, even if it isn't quite as extreme as Venus." As they stepped forward toward the dome's entrance, each of them felt the thrill of discovery and the weight of everything they still didn't know. They stepped out and found themselves on a swath of vibrant green grass, dotted with wildflowers and young trees swaying in a faint breeze. None of them had expected Mars to look so lush. Steve glanced around, incredulous. How was this even possible? A tall figure in a sleek uniform approached and bowed slightly. "Welcome to Mars, honored guests from alien Earth." His voice was calm, resonant, almost human. Beyond him stood a dozen or more identical figures, each over 2 meters tall, with strong builds and sharp, handsome features. Natasha caught her breath. Even Tony, who'd been here once before, looked startled. "They're enormous," he muttered. "They are Martians," the first guide explained. "Genetically engineered by Ethan, their average height is 2 meters. Steve ran a hand over his scalp, trying to process the claim. "Created humans? That sounds like the work of a deity." "Not at all," another Martian said, stepping forward. "It's purely biogenetic technology, DNA sculpted to thrive in Mars's thin atmosphere and lower gravity." "Please follow me," the first Martian continued. The Emperor awaits you." He turned and led them off the open-air landing platform, winding down a gently sloping path carved through the greenery. As they walked, Natasha patted the small device strapped to her wrist. Her original camera had lost signal the moment they emerged, inevitable on a world so remote. She tucked it away and switched on a compact video recorder. Her mission was clear: document everything on Mars. After all, if Ethan had invited her here, he'd want every detail captured. Ethan followed the Martians until at last they reached the heart of the Martian Empire. Overhead, the sky shimmered in every color of the rainbow, illuminating a vast city sculpted from a single, gleaming metallic alloy. The towers, each easily 100 meters tall, rose like monumental obelisks, their surfaces so flawlessly smooth and seamless that they seemed almost alive. From above, their rooftops formed intricate polygonal patterns, not unlike crystalline snowflakes spread across the horizon. The entire vista felt like a window into the pinnacle of advanced alien engineering. "It's unbelievable," Steve murmured, eyes wide. "Do you think humanity will ever catch up to this level of technology?" Tony turned with a confident grin. "Relax. You've got Stark Industries in your corner. We'll get there before you know it." Before Ethan could reply, the Martians led them deeper into the city, straight to an astonishing sight. Floating high in the prismatic sky was an enormous aerial port, its docking bays filled with nearly 100 colossal space battleships. Each vessel dwarfed anything Ethan had ever imagined. Their immense hulls stretched across the clouds like silent giants ready for deployment. Ethan hovered just outside S.H.I.E.L.D.'s orbital perimeter when the first of them arrived. Massive warships that blackened the sky and in an instant tore S.H.I.E.L.D.'s proud space carrier to shreds. Alongside these behemoths, the carrier looked as puny as a Quinjet beside a star dreadnought. "Sir," Tony's voice crackled in Ethan's helmet, "those hull markings are Chinese characters. They read Big Mac." Big Mac indeed. These assault carriers were colossal star combat ships, bristling with gun turrets, launch bays full of fighter craft, and entire decks dedicated to battle operations. They were mobile bases for sustained campaigns in orbit. And there wasn't just one. Ethan counted nearly 100 of these floating fortresses, each escorted by swarms of smaller battleships the fleet had dubbed Decepticons. When a true carrier wasn't present, these capital ships assumed the same command and control role. Below them, the orbital docking ring had become a hive of frantic activity. Scores of transports and unships wove between docking clamps, hauling troops and supplies. Even the smallest of those vessels dwarfed an ordinary aerospace carrier, and their fighters outmatched the Quinjet by a significant margin. Ethan exhaled, steeling himself. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s entire space armada had been outgunned and outnumbered in seconds. Now it was up to him and his team to find a way to turn the tide. Chapter 391, Equal Diplomacy. The small transports gliding in Mars's low orbit carried only minimal armor and armaments, hardly warships at all. But alongside them loomed the sleek black and silver Megatron fighters, vessels built for both hyperspatial cruise and lightning-fast combat. Each could lock into a towering robot form at the pilot's command. As the orbital camera zoomed in, the vast Mars dock spread beneath them like an iron fortress. Countless Martian workers moved in precise formation, supervising cargo transfers, repairing hull plating, and maintaining security grids. Even Tony felt a jolt of astonishment. "What is all that?" he blurted, gesturing at the armada gathering beyond the transports. A nearby Martian representative smiled casually. "That," he said, "is the Mars Imperial Fleet, 400 ships readied by the Emperor himself. They're preparing to depart the Sol system. After all, the resources of our solar neighborhood are almost exhausted, but the universe beyond is practically infinite." Tony and his companions exchanged stunned looks. Hank Banner's eyes went wide. "Depart the solar system? Ethan's moving on already?" They had come to Mars to negotiate a new, equal diplomacy treaty with Ethan's colony. Yet here he was, pushing even farther into the stars. Their development pace was staggering. Coach shook his head incredulously. How long has he even been on Mars? And now he's star-hopping? Someone's got to be cheating. The Martian envoy chuckled. "It's not a relocation. It's purely an exploratory mission. If they discover planets rich in minerals or energy, the fleet will send their findings straight back. That way, we'll know exactly where to harvest next." Relief washed over the human delegates. So it wasn't a full exodus, just the bold scouting expedition they'd come to see. It seemed, after all, that Ethan's grand vision for humanity was only beginning to unfold. "We'll start mining the resources," the Martian announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The universe isn't as simple as you think." Carol said nothing. She'd expected the Martian fleet to be formidable. She'd faced many powerful armadas in her decades among the stars, but she'd never seen anything like this. Not unbeatable, perhaps, but certainly among the galaxy's elite. The fleet was proof of Emperor Ethan's genius and technological supremacy. Still, Carol couldn't shake her unease. Their methods felt off. "We've already done our reconnaissance," she replied coolly. Silently, the party followed the Martian deeper into the palace. At its heart towered a massive transparent display case, inside which sat a machine so unpretentious it looked cobbled together. Its rough edges and exposed plating belied its importance. Tony rushed forward, eyes shining. "The Pathfinder," he breathed. A ripple of excitement ran through the onlookers. In Tony's collection of hypercars, luxury yachts, and private space tugs, nothing compared to this legendary device. If he ever unloaded half his fleet, he still wouldn't make back its value. "This was found on Mars," the Martian continued, gesturing toward the machine. "All its parts lay in ruin, scrap metal and burnt circuitry. But Emperor Ethan saw its potential. He reassembled every component with his own hands, then sealed the Pathfinder here in a hermetically controlled, dust and gas-free chamber." Carol studied the machine with renewed interest. The Pathfinder's reputation alone spoke volumes, but knowing Ethan had personally restored it elevated its significance to the realm of the extraordinary. Here, in this alien palace, she realized, lay both an unprecedented opportunity and a warning. Power this great always came with a price. The Martian guard's voice cut through the courtyard's stillness. "That's human property," Carol snapped, folding her arms. "It doesn't belong to him." The guard sneered back. "Everything on Mars belongs to the Emperor." Carol bristled, ready to retort, but Natasha laid a calming hand on her arm. "We're on their turf. Let's not push our luck." He stepped into the grand palace hall, half expecting their host to be seated on a lofty throne. Instead, Ethan stood off to one side, arms folded, watching them with quiet amusement. Tony broke into a grin and strode forward. He threw an arm around Ethan's shoulders. "I thought you'd be up there, on the throne, looking down on us." Ethan laughed, returning the hug. "I'm no Tony Stark. If I were, I'd probably do exactly that, and be surrounded by a harem of fangirls." "Doctor." Banner stepped up next, offering a broad smile. "Long time no see, Ethan." In an instant, Banner's form rippled green and grew, transforming into the Hulk. He reached out and gave Ethan a hearty backslap. Unfazed, Ethan patted the Hulk's massive shoulder as if greeting an old friend. The impact would have flattened most people, but he merely grinned. Carol narrowed her eyes, her tone blunt. "So, you really are Ethan?" He met her gaze evenly. "Yes. Got a problem with that?" Natasha moved between them, her voice cool. "Let's keep things civil." Ethan shrugged, glancing around the hall. "Don't worry, I'm not exactly up to speed on Earth's news these days. I've been occupied elsewhere." Ethan still hadn't heard a word about the Saiyan invasion. He didn't even know who Carol was. Tony tossed him a wry smile. "She's the most powerful woman on Earth right now." Tony laughed. "Don't forget, men are pretty strong too." Carol rolled her eyes. "What about Black Caesar?" she shot back. Tony arched an eyebrow. "Black Caesar?" "No one really knows who or what Black Caesar is," Carol said. "Rumor has it his identity and even his gender are a mystery." Just then, Thor strode forward. Carol fixed him with a cool stare. "Thor, son of Odin," he announced with a flourish. Thor glanced at Carol and back at Ethan. "A pleasure. I take it this fine lady isn't here just to chat. She wants a sparring match." Ethan studied Carol's determined expression and gave Thor a nod. "She's serious, and she deserves to see what real power looks like." Carol let a half-smile curve her lips. She wasn't trying to start a feud. She simply wanted to prove a point. The world had changed, and it no longer needed Ethan's old methods. Now they stood on equal footing, and a friendly duel seemed the best way to make that clear. She flicked her hair aside and asked, almost lightly, "So, shall we begin?" Banner scratched his head, clearly uneasy. "I don't know about this, Tony." Tony waved him off, his tone casual. "Relax, Banner. Carol's stubborn, but she has her reasons. Banner folded his arms. Diplomacy only works when both sides have equal power. If they don't, we're just playing colonizers. Tony shrugged. Fair point, no objections then. Ethan led them down a narrow hallway to a heavy steel door. Once inside, he punched a code into the keypad. The lights inside the chamber were harsh and clinical. These walls, Ethan explained, are lined with a custom alloy our team developed. Even if you detonated a nuclear device in here, the container wouldn't deform. Tony's eyebrows shot up. In an enclosed space, a nuclear blast wreaks maximum havoc. If this alloy can survive that, it's beyond anything we've ever seen, maybe even stronger than vibranium. Carol Danvers cracked her knuckles and offered Ethan a grin. Excellent, then let's get started. Your Majesty, do you want to warm up first? Ethan shook his head. No warm-up needed. Carol paused, studying him. For a moment she thought she saw tension flicker across his face, but when she looked again, his expression was as calm and unreadable as ever. Carol's scowl deepened. Ethan's calm, almost amused gaze reminded her of a lion watching a monkey's antics. He looked at her as if thinking, I'm the king of beasts, you're nothing but a plaything. She snorted in irritation. Your Majesty, pay attention, she spat, voice low and dangerous. In an instant, Carol blurred into motion, accelerating to supersonic speed. Her fist rocketed toward Ethan's jaw and passed right through thin air. She felt a strange weakness in her arm just before her knuckles slammed into his face. Carol's eyes widened. He hadn't budged a hair. Too slow, Ethan murmured, stepping aside so casually it made her blood boil. She barely registered the words when a white-hot pain flared in her stomach. The world tilted as she crumpled to the ground. Ethan had effortlessly blocked her strike, countered with lightning speed, and slipped in behind her. Carol gritted her teeth, tasting blood, as she realized just how far outmatched she'd been. Chapter 392, Wiping the Floor with Your Face. Care to continue, Miss Carol? Ethan's challenge hung in the air, a sly invitation to keep their duel going. Carol glared. She wasn't about to back down. After all, she was Carol. Our battle has only just begun, Your Majesty. He offered a polite nod. Very well. Why don't you strike first? That civil tone only stoked her irritation. With a snarl, Carol slammed her palm against the ground, sending a shockwave rippling outward. There, my opening move. Ethan merely raised an eyebrow. All right then, stay on guard. Before Carol could steady herself, he vanished and reappeared instantly at her side. In one fluid motion, he clamped a large hand over her face and hurled her into the arena wall with bone-shattering force, his trademark technique, the Titan Slam. Carol's cheek met stone with a thunderous crack. For a dizzying heartbeat, their faces nearly collided, their lips brushing and tongues trembling in the absurdest of accidental kisses. She staggered, dazed, pressed against the wall. Above her, Ethan's triumphant laugh rang out as he swept her off her feet and flung her toward the opposite barrier, leaving Carol reeling, and their contest far from over. Bump, boom, boom, boom. We all stood frozen as Ethan slammed Carol into the wall again and again. Each strike echoed through the hangar like thunder. Is he angry? Doctor, Banner whispered, scarcely believing his eyes. None of us had ever seen Ethan like this. Steve squinted, trying to track the blur of motion. At this speed, it was impossible to follow every punch, but the shifting lights and shadows told a clear story. Carol was losing ground, fast. With a final, brutal roar, Ethan caught Carol's head and drove it into the concrete floor, dragging her face across the pavement. Metal groaned under the force, sparks flew where armor met stone, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed as though the ground itself would crack. Enough! Carol screamed, her body erupting in a brilliant white-hot glow. In an instant, she shifted into her binary form, raw starfire pulsating around her. After being ground against the earth for what felt like miles, she wrenched free of Ethan's grip. Ethan pulled back, dusting imaginary dirt from his gauntlets. He stared down at his hands with a wry smile. Wow, that stuff's tougher than I thought. Didn't even shed a hair. Carol lay on the cracked pavement, blood trickling down her cheek as she glared up at him. Never before had she felt so humiliated. And Ethan, he just looked amused. No one else could have done this to Carol. Raditz wouldn't, nor would Black Caesar. Ethan was the only one cruel enough. And Carol would never forget him, though her memory would be carved not with love but with something far darker. Once Carol snapped into her binary form, her power spiked beyond anything she'd felt before. As a Kree-human hybrid, she'd always carried latent cosmic energy inherited from her mother's people. In the comics, Kree blood courses with extraordinary potential, but it's notoriously difficult to awaken. The films never dwelled on that heritage, yet Carol's real growth came not from training on Earth, but from facing enemies who could truly crush her. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. First, Raditz had overwhelmed her, almost killing her outright. Then Black Caesar had delivered a merciless pounding of his own. Each time she lay broken, it only awakened deeper reserves of strength. By the time she recovered, something inside her had shifted. Now, when she flickered into her binary state, it was as though a star had ignited behind her eyes. Her energy crackled with new intensity, flaring in brilliant bursts that obliterated anything or anyone that crossed her path. Ethan had thought he could break her. Instead, he unleashed her power, and Carol vowed that, once she'd finished with him, he'd remember her name for the rest of his days. Binary Star Mode. In the comics lore, when Captain Marvel shifts into her binary star mode, she effectively taps in to a theoretical white hole, a cosmic counterpart to the black hole posited by general relativity. Whereas a black hole endlessly draws in matter and energy, a white hole continually expels them, never absorbing anything in return. By linking herself to a white hole, Captain Marvel can siphon off its tremendous outpouring of energy and matter, exponentially boosting her own power. In this state, she wields enough raw force to obliterate hundreds of enemy vessels in a single strike, far surpassing the methodical, one-ship-at-a-time approach we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 2 when Ego the Living Planet attacked. This isn't just cinematic flair. In Ms. Marvel Vol. 2, Issue 14, Captain Marvel unleashes her binary star power to destroy an entire planet with one devastating blow. That world was the home of the villainous Bruder Zurg, and when she tapped into her white hole connection, not even he could survive the onslaught. Carol's power had reached a cosmic scale. She could command every band of the electromagnetic spectrum and manipulate gravitational fields at will. Her long, golden hair floated weightlessly, her body bathed in a brilliant, sunlit aura. She shone like a Super Saiyan, so dazzling and formidable that she was certain even Raditz, in his great ape form, wouldn't be able to stop her. The energy pouring from the white hole had sharpened her strength and speed to unfathomable degrees. With barely a thought, she stepped forward, and in an instant she was face to face with Ethan. The impact of her arrival detonated like a thunderclap. Boom! A hurricane-force shockwave ripped outward, hurling every onlooker off their feet. Thor, caught in the blast, staggered and blinked in surprise. He never imagined the gulf between Carol and Ethan could be so vast. As the searing light and heat of the explosion finally faded, a startling image emerged. Carol's bronze fist, still crackling with raw power, was pinned to the scorched earth beneath one of Ethan's boots. Even as she flooded the ground with unending bursts of energy, vastly exceeding the output of human hydrogen bombs, Ethan stood unyielding, as immovable and solid as a mountain. No matter how fiercely Carol exploded her cosmic might, she could neither retract her fist nor advance an inch. The two stood locked in a silent testament to their unmatched strengths, the battlefield around them trembling in the aftermath of their clash. An invisible barrier had absorbed the full force of the Emperor's unleashed power, but even so, a thunderous shockwave still slammed into the gathered heroes. They reeled as if caught in the epicenter of a blast. Ethan is actually that powerful? Thor's voice trembled with awe. He'd always suspected the Emperor was formidable, but he'd never imagined anything like this. Carol had poured every ounce of her cosmic might into that blast, and yet Ethan had cut her down in a single stroke. Carol had long since surpassed Saul in strength, and now Ethan had made Carol look like a mere student. Tony Stark clenched his fists behind his back, a mix of admiration and envy blazing in his eyes. "I've got to hand it to him," he muttered. "His transformation technology, it's leagues beyond anything we've seen. Compound number 2 is a byproduct of Ethan's own refinement process, utterly top shelf. Even I can't synthesize that level of upgrade." As the dust settled, the heroes exchanged uneasy glances. They had come expecting a clash of equals. Instead, they'd witnessed a masterclass in power, and realized they were far from prepared for Emperor Ethan's true capabilities. Chapter 393, The Emperor's Angel, the Jedi Knight. Ethan pressed his advantage ruthlessly. He knew that without coercion, Tony would never resume his nanorobot research. Tony believed it was his only way out of this mess. With each brutal strike, Ethan reinforced that truth. Disobedience meant pain. Carol let out a furious roar and summoned a surge of force energy, driving Ethan back for a moment. But he recovered instantly, unleashing an even stronger counterattack. His boot connected with her face in a devastating blow. Several of her teeth exploded like shattered porcelain. Some fragments clattered to the floor as she involuntarily swallowed a few. Carol's scream filled the room as she spat a mouthful of blood. Before she could brace herself, Ethan seized a handful of her hair and yanked her to her feet with bone-crushing force. His fist slammed into her abdomen, the impact detonating through her core like compressed blast. Gasping and doubled over, she could only clutch at her middle as pain seized her completely. A second punch nailed her square on the nose. The bone cracked under the strike, and crimson fluid poured down her swollen face. Carol lurched backward, her hair pulled free in tufts as she was hurled across the chamber. She smashed into the far wall and rebounded like an over-tightened spring. Ethan followed through without hesitation. His third blow thundered against the reinforced plating of her armor, enough force to dent the iron-hard composite beneath her skin. The echo of metal groaning under the impact was the final testament to his dominance. Carol collapsed to the ground, battered and bleeding, every breath a ragged gasp. Ethan stood over her, unyielding. As Tony looked on in grim realization, the only way forward was to call off his nanorobot program, or face the same fate. All of Carol's ribs lay shattered, bone fragments piercing her lungs and vital organs. Internal bleeding flooded her chest cavity, and she convulsed violently on the cold concrete. "That's enough, Ethan," Thor's voice boomed, Mjolnir crashing between them and forcing Ethan to pull his punch. Carol's body skidded across the ground, bouncing twice before collapsing in a heap. Blood poured from her nose and mouth, pooling beneath her like a crimson shadow. Everyone froze, horror etched on their faces. Tony Stark was the first to move. "You're not going to let her die, Ethan, are you?" His voice trembled with fear. "Why are you being so brutal?" Captain Rogers demanded, stepping forward with clenched fists. Tony dropped to one knee beside Carol, checking her pulse. "She's losing too much blood." Ethan remained perfectly still, arms folded across his chest. He glanced at Carol and back at the others with cold certainty. "She'll be fine. The energy coursing through her cells is already repairing the worst of the damage. As long as that reserve holds, she can't die." They all remembered Carol's past recoveries, nearly torn apart by Raditz, left in ruins by Black Caesar, only to leap back to her feet moments later. But seeing her so broken now, and standing witness to Ethan's unshakable calm, they realized one thing above all. Ethan had grown far stronger than any of them had dared imagine. Tony beamed with pride at Ethan's triumph, yet he knew his next words would be hard to say. Their friend Ethan had not only met expectations, he'd exceeded them, decisively defeating Carol and silencing her doubts. With such a display of strength, he was certain to hold the upper hand in the upcoming diplomatic talks. Of course, they wouldn't risk humiliating the country or losing their sovereignty. At worst, they'd emerge only slightly stronger than before. For now, Ethan had instructed Tony and the others to remain here until further notice, promising that all substantive discussions would resume the following day. As they settled into the guest hall, a group of Martian soldiers practicing on the courtyard lawn caught Tony's eye. Each moved with fluid precision, igniting slender, glowing blades that hummed softly through the air. "A light. Saber," Tony whispered, stunned. His colleagues gaped at the elegant melee exhibition. "Indeed, our signature weaponry from Mars," said a tall, striking Martian who strode forward. His high cheekbones and angular features were perfectly symmetrical, as if carved from marble. "I'm Sturgis." Sturgis paused, studying the Terran's open-mouthed expressions with amused curiosity. "You've heard of us, yes? We Martians are said to possess no fat cells, so we never gain weight, no matter how much we eat. The downside is that without regular sustenance, we can't survive long. But as Ethan's envoys, we're expected to look our best at all times. even if it means, well, you understand. He smirked and sheathed his lightsaber in a single fluid motion, the blade's glow retreating into the hilt with a soft click. The diplomats finally found their voices and hurried to ask questions, eager to learn more about their Martian hosts and the extraordinary weaponry that might soon feature in interplanetary affairs. "Isn't that a Jedi Knight's lightsaber?" Tony blurted, incredulous. He wanted to object, but seeing Ethan wield it so effortlessly, the idea suddenly felt plausible. Natasha had heard of Star Wars, of course, but she'd never taken Martian combat capabilities seriously. Now, watching a Martian soldier ignite a blade of pure plasma, her pupils constricted. Could every one of these aliens really be a Jedi Knight? It sounded ridiculous. Earth might surrender before the sheer size of the Martian fleet, but to imagine each warrior as powerful as a Jedi was unthinkable. In the original Star Wars lore, the Order never numbered more than 10,000, even with Sith Lords and Inquisitors factored in. There simply weren't enough Force users in the galaxy to fill these ranks. "Do they? Use the Force?" Natasha whispered. Everyone except Steve froze in stunned silence. Tony leaned forward, eyes gleaming with scientific curiosity. "I need to study these lightsabers up close." Sturgis rubbed his chin. "Wait, what's the Force again?" "It's an energy field," Tony explained, "that binds the galaxy together. Jedi can tap into it to influence minds, move objects, even crush enemies without lifting a finger. And their lightsabers? Supposedly indestructible plasma blades." Ethan deactivated his lightsaber and clipped it back to his belt. The humming glow faded to a simple metal hilt. For a moment, the room was still, as if everyone held their breath, torn between awe and alarm at the possibilities. If Martians truly possessed Jedi training and Force powers, humanity faced a threat far beyond conventional weapons. Tony was already eyeing the weapon thoughtfully. "We need to analyze its energy signature," he murmured. Natasha placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Let's first figure out how to survive this." Ethan's calm smile offered little reassurance. "Survival," he said quietly, "starts with understanding." And with that, the lightsaber hilt gleamed once more under the harsh hangar lights, an alien technology that might very well determine the fate of Earth. What special power is needed? And how do you protect yourselves? You can't exactly go toe-to-toe with firearms or energy weapons in a straight fight, Dr. Banner added, curiosity brimming in his voice. "We use an AT field," Sturgis replied. "An AT field?" The room fell silent. No one recognized the term. Sturgis smiled and explained, "It's a manifestation of the soul, often called the heart wall. It grants resistance against mental intrusion, physical blows, and energy attacks alike. The stronger your mind, the thicker your barrier." He glanced toward Ethan, who was adjusting a console. Ethan's original plan had been simple. Gift every Martian in the Empire the shape-shifting powers of Martian Manhunter like Uncle John, or even the raw strength of the Red Hulk. But the unique laws of the Empire dimension forced him to reconsider. If death became all but impossible, the souls of the living would remain tethered indefinitely, creating a perpetual, costly obligation. Out of respect for foe, are his people, Ethan refused to claim anyone's soul unless they died naturally or fell in battle. Ethan paused and considered his next move. He knew that the mind, so closely bound to the soul, held the key. A stronger soul meant greater power. With that in mind, he bestowed upon the Martians their greatest weapons, the indestructible light sword and the unbreakable shield known as the Heart Wall. "As long as your mind stands firm," Ethan announced, "you can deflect any attack. The Heart Wall is the ultimate defense. Anyone who claims they can slice through it with a lightsaber, drag them to Aruba's arena. Let them try until they fall." But this wasn't an ordinary lightsaber. Forged by Ethan's own hands, it drew its energy from the warrior's will, giving it enough substance to clash with solid matter. The stronger the fighter's mind, the more powerful the blade became. A warrior who could both wield the light sword and uphold the heart wall earned the title Emperor's Angel. Unlike a simple beam of light, Ethan's sword took the shape of a dark-edged blade, sleek, refined, and infinitely more formidable than any standard saber. Chapter 394, The Strongest of the Martian Empire. Martian lightsabers vary as much as their wielder's power. The more formidable the warrior, the more unique and sometimes bizarre their saber's design. Take the blades from Dropped City, or those used by the so-called weak warrior. Some are strikingly elegant, others downright puzzling in shape. By and large, regular troopers carry standard-issue sabers with conventional hilts and straight blades. Elite or heroic units, however, sport custom designs that reflect both their status and fighting style. These sabers aren't merely hand-to-hand weapons. Expert users can project a light slash, sending a blade of energy hurtling at an opponent from afar. Certain high-end models can even elongate their beam into a 40-meter sword, slicing through enemies at a distance with terrifying precision. Martians who lack the innate ability to ignite a lightsaber, or who cannot manifest the so-called heart barrier for defense, must rely on blasters and energy rifles instead. Blaster bolts detonate on impact, while energy rifles unleash superheated beams that melt and penetrate armor. In the Martian Empire's ranks, weapon choice is as much a sign of one's rank and lineage as it is a tool of war. Originally, Ethan had planned to outfit them in standard Imperial Stormtrooper armor, but with each of them standing well over 2 meters tall, the suits simply wouldn't fit. Instead, he commissioned a custom set of power armor modeled after Master Chief's Mjolnir design, helmets and all. The new gear felt like it had been made for them. Tony turned to Ethan with a grin. "This is incredible. I don't even recognize this place as Mars anymore." On Mars, Ethan could manipulate storms at will. Here, he'd swapped out the harsh floodlights for a colossal, shimmering moon suspended overhead, complete with a sprinkle of colorful stars. It felt like standing under an open sky on some far-flung wilderness world. "I'm going to put in a request to bring Boz here next time," Tony continued. "She's going to love this view." Natasha raised her visor and stared at the gigantic lunar disk, so close it seemed you could almost touch it. The multicolored stars looked like scattered jewels. Without the buzz of mosquitoes or the clatter of palace machinery, the scene was almost dreamlike. "It's stunning," she murmured. Ethan offered a modest nod. "Glad you like it." Carol, however, lingered off to the side with her arms crossed, clearly displeased. She still hadn't worked out how Ethan had beaten her, and she wasn't about to let him forget it. Ethan was no superhuman in the mold of Black Caesar. As Tony Stark pointed out, Ethan had modified his own body, and the results were astonishing. Whatever process he'd used, it far surpassed ordinary bioengineering. Carol Danvers, who'd served alongside the Kree Empire's most elite units, knew better than anyone how limited Kree human augmentation truly was. Even the 3 great empires of the galaxy lacked anything approaching Ethan's upgrades. And yet here he stood, proof that someone on Earth had cracked, then perfected, technology that even the Kree couldn't reverse engineer. If his transformation could be replicated, or worse, mass-produced, a single Ethan could sweep aside entire planetary defenses. 2 Ethans, the Martian Empire wouldn't stand a chance. The balance of power in the universe would tip irreversibly. Carol understood what this meant, and it terrified her. She couldn't bring herself to destroy Ethan. She had no way to defeat him. But she also knew Earth needed him more than ever. With outside threats like the Scions circling and internal adversaries such as Black Caesar stirring trouble, humanity's fate might just depend on the mercurial man who'd made himself superhuman. In Carol's mind, the question wasn't whether Ethan should be stopped, but how to guide his power towards saving worlds rather than conquering them. "Ethan, aside from your Martian warriors, those Force wielders who fight like Jedi, do you have any other heavy hitters?" Tony Stark asked, leaning forward in his seat. He couldn't help himself. As the ruler of a fully developed empire, Ethan's roster of champions fascinated him. Thor, standing nearby, immediately perked up at the question. Asgard had never been cut off from the wider universe. Even in his youth, he'd traveled the cosmos across the Bifrost, and he knew the Collector's domain firsthand, a place Asgardian envoys visited regularly. In Thor's experience, the Martian Empire was a minor nuisance at best. He'd sweep through their legions without breaking a sweat. Yet every time he'd sparred with Emperor Ethan, it was Thor who ended up flat on his back. In a universe teeming with radiation-enhanced soldiers, genetically mutated superhumans, and others with powers beyond imagination, no conventional army or fleet could rival true metahumans. If sheer numbers or advanced ships were enough, Asgard would never have abandoned its navy and been overrun by the Dark Elves. Absolutely. Ethan said with a calm confidence, flashing a small, knowing smile. Would you like a demonstration? He already understood Tony's real intent, to gauge just how formidable the Martian Empire's elite really were. Earth teetered on the brink. Between the relentless Martian fleet and the encroaching Jedi Knights, humanity's defenses were all but shattered. Now, only the Martian Empire's top champions stood between Earth and oblivion. And as impressive as Ethan was, no single man, no matter how gifted, could hope to be invincible. I want to see this, Saul said, a glint of excitement in his eyes. He had long felt overshadowed by Ethan's prowess, but the promise of other Martian legends stirred a rare spark of anticipation within him. Thor, whose greatest joy was testing his strength against worthy foes, let out a hearty laugh. Sturges, my friend, let's have some fun. Ethan simply nodded. Without a word, Sturges, the Martian who had played the unassuming guide, stepped forward. The others watched in astonishment. None had guessed that the mild-mannered attendant was in fact one of the Empire's elite warriors. Be careful, Sturges cautioned Saul, though his tone was almost amused. At Ethan's signal, the clearing was bathed in a soft glow as a nearly invisible energy barrier sprang to life around the designated arena. It formed a perfect sphere, transparent enough to see every movement, but strong enough to contain the clash that was about to unfold. Thor bounced on the balls of his feet, fists clenched and ready. Saul's heart pounded. Ethan stood at the edge of the ring, his expression calm and unreadable. Incoming, Ethan murmured, and with that single word, the contest began. Never mind, send your creature forward. Saul's eyes gleamed with anticipation, and Tony Stark, along with the others, tensed for what was coming. A thunderous roar filled the hall. Ethan's frame began to swell, sinew and muscle bulging beneath reddening skin. In moments he stood fully transformed, a colossal, crimson-skinned giant, 12 feet tall, with 4 burning eyes and 4 powerful arms. Bruce Banner's jaw dropped. Is that the Hulk? No, Ethan rumbled, each word shaking the floor. This is the 4-handled Overlord, my ultimate breakthrough in transformation technology. I chose not to use it on myself because of what it does to you. Tony raised an eyebrow. The 4-handled Overlord? The name suited the massive warrior before them, but its true capabilities remained a mystery. Thor stepped forward, Mjolnir crackling with lightning. He grinned, thrilled by the sight of such raw power. All right then, let's see it in action. With a swift swing of his hammer, this time held firmly in hand, Thor launched the first strike. Even the mighty Captain Marvel would pale beside the raw might of Ethan's Overlord form. No one, it seemed, could intimidate this 4-armed titan, except perhaps the one called Imperial Majesty. Chapter 395, The 4-Armed Overlord. Thor and the 4-Armed Overlord collided head-on, unleashing a series of thunderous shockwaves that rippled through the air. With 2 of his massive arms, the Overlord caught Mjolnir, and with the other 2 he landed brutal blows to Thor's face and abdomen. The god staggered back, nearly spitting out the ale he'd just drunk. Before Thor could recover, the Overlord gripped his shoulders and arms, hoisted him aloft, and slammed him to the ground. He rained down relentless strikes, each one driving the Asgardian deeper into the dust. Tony Stark's eyes widened in disbelief. Thor's raw strength was known to rank among the top 3 in the Illuminati, and even the Hulk had to reach a towering level of rage before he could threaten him. Yet here they were, watching Thor pinned and pulverized by a single Martian warrior. Carol Danvers frowned. If the Martian Empire boasted fighters this formidable, so far beyond most civilizations except the 3 galactic superpowers, Earth's new neighbor could pose an unimaginable threat. Not even Thor stood a chance against such power. Below them, the battlefield fell silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the grim reality. If this was the best Martian combatant, the Empire's true might was beyond anything they had ever faced. Thor barely had time to register the threat before he hurled the Meowhammer. The enchanted weapon shattered mid-flight, spawning a storm of 1,000 miniature hammers that slammed toward the 4-handed Overlord. Yet the Overlord didn't falter. With a casual sweep of all 4 arms, he scattered the fragments, which splintered harmlessly against a glowing, diamond-shaped energy shield enveloping him. Dr. Bruce Banner's eyes widened. "The Wall of the Heart?" he whispered. "It grows stronger with one's willpower. So not only is he powerful physically, He's bolstered by an indestructible mental barrier. Thor ground his teeth. Then how do we breach it? Banner's face grew grave. If his mental shield can shrug off even that many magical strikes, I'm not sure. Hulk might not be enough. At that, a guttural roar echoed through the chamber. Banner doubled over, his skin rippling green as he transformed. Half his face was already fused with the familiar visage of the Hulk. "Hulk, strongest!" he thundered. Banner, still part man, shot the raging green giant a pleading look. "It's all right, big guy. I've got you. We'll figure this out together." From the corner, Thor pressed a hand to his temple. "Not again," he muttered, bracing himself. Energized by rage, Thor lunged at the four-handed overlord once more. If this creature were as strong and resilient as the Hulk, but even half as swift, Thor might have struggled, but this swirling energy shield made the battle feel unfair. Undeterred, Thor unleashed Hellfire, those hell-spawned flames that burn not just flesh but soul. Few can withstand that true, agonizing damage. Now, for the first time, Thor wielded it himself. As the inferno engulfed the Overlord's armored torso, a diamond-shaped barrier shimmered into existence around him. It was more than an invisible force field. Thor could actually see the barrier's heart-shaped core glow, pulse by pulse, absorbing the heat. Even as the hellfire clawed at its edges, the shield held firm, its crystalline facets radiating raw power. At the same time, Thor felt his thunder god powers near awakening. Between the devastating hellfire and the roar of the storm within him, every blow he struck seemed to bypass defenses. Twice blessed by fire and lightning, he would shatter any defense. But the Overlord's barrier, both tough and swift to repair, continued to hold. Each flash of the diamond surface showed exactly how much of the hellfire's assault it neutralized, an astonishing amount. The creature within the shield may have been challenged, but it was far from defeated. And as Thor readied his hammer for another cataclysmic strike, both combatants braced for a second round, one in which only the gods themselves could say who would stand victor. "I us." Ethan's warning left the four-armed overlord no choice but to pull back. With a final roar, the hulking combatant unleashed a flurry of blows at Thor. Gripping his hammer tight, Thor wove and dodged, narrowly escaping each crushing strike, but everyone could see he was running out of time and stamina. "Enough, Sturgis," Ethan called calmly. At once, the armored giant sprang back, and in a ripple of energy, reverted to his human form. Sturgis. Without another word, he bowed and withdrew from the ring. Ethan offered Thor a cool smile. "If Prince Thor hasn't had his fill of fun, we can always give him another turn later." He glanced at Saul, already stepping forward. "Your move." Saul nodded and strode into the arena. "Thor, take 5. Let the Hulk have a shot." From the sideline, Steve Rogers couldn't hide his concern. "You really shouldn't stand there and watch Thor get pummeled further. Those hits from the four-armed overlord left some nasty bruises." Steve would have volunteered himself if he could, but he settled for a steadying hand on Thor's shoulder. Thor shook him off with a grin. "I'm fine, just a few scratches," he insisted, lifting Mjolnir. There was no way he was showing defeat tonight. Ethan's lips curved into a confident smile. "All right, Pedrosiping, let's see what you've got." At his command, one of the Martians rose to his feet. "Yes, Your Majesty." The figure looked unremarkable at first, but after Thor's encounter with the four-armed overlord, he'd learned never to underestimate a Martian warrior. Thor folded his arms and studied the newcomer. "You can't transform, can you?" "I can," Pedrosiping replied calmly. In an instant, his form began to shift. His lean humanoid frame expanded and hardened, pale green crystals erupting across his skin. 4 jagged spines of the same mineral shot out down his back. When the transformation completed, he towered over them all, a living colossus of shining silicon. Thor's eyes widened. "What on Mars?" Ethan stepped forward, surveying the crystalline giant with evident satisfaction. "Meet the Diamond War God," he announced. It's a silicon-based life form whose entire body is a fortress of ultra-hard crystals. By rearranging its molecular structure, it can shape part of itself into lethal weapons, fire crystal missiles from its fists, or rapidly grow crystalline armor. He paused, letting the information sink in. That ability even grants it limited regeneration. It can build solid walls at will, trap enemies in crystal cages, or launch spikes of any shape. Its surface refracts laser fire, rendering most energy attacks useless, and it can even absorb and repurpose that energy. Flames slip right off its silicon hide, and conventional weapons struggle to dent those hard crystal plates. A hushed awe fell over the assembly. A trip to Mars, they realized, was teaching them more in an hour than they'd learned in a lifetime back home. The Diamond War god can survive in the vacuum of space. Ethan unveiled the sleek figure on the display platform, his tone as casual as if he were showing off a new smartphone. "Do you think Diamond War God does it justice?" Dr. Banner could hardly contain his excitement. "Ethan, this converting a carbon-based organism into a fully silicon-based war machine? That's beyond anything I've ever dreamed of. It's not just another augmentation. You've rewritten the very rules of biology." He turned to Tony. "You're known as Iron Man, but by that logic, you're really Gold Titanium Man." Tony chuckled at the comparison, but Natasha and Steve exchanged uneasy looks. If the Martian Empire boasted 3 champions like Emperor Ethan, the fearsome four-handed overlord, and now this indestructible Diamond War god, who knew how many more superpowered warriors lay in their ranks? It was a bitter irony. Ethan had been born on Earth, then driven away under a cloud of distrust. Now he stood at the pinnacle of Martian power, performing feats humanity could only envy. And here on Earth, they had little choice but to swallow their pride and bay for his help. Chapter 396, Alien Heroes versus the Illuminati. The crowd was abuzz, debating which of Commander Xiaoban's 2 juggernauts, the Diamond God of War or the Four-Handed Overlord, really had the edge. If both warriors were puppeted by Xiaoban's AI, it would be a dead heat. But in their original bodies, the Diamond God boasted both ironclad defense and devastating firepower. He was the obvious favorite. No sooner had the Diamond God taken the field than the Norse god of thunder, Thor himself, strode in to do battle. Seconds later, to everyone's shock, Thor lay sprawling on the arena floor. The Diamond God's punishing blows and impenetrable armor proved too much, and the God of Thunder was felled in the blink of an eye. Before the stunned audience could react, the Green Hulk burst forward, flexing with barely contained glee. "Thor's down! Hulk's the strongest now," he bellowed, slapping his shoulder triumphantly. Thor scrambled to his feet, fury flashing in his eyes. "Laugh all you like, big guy. We'll see who's laughing last." Like 2 squabbling children, they traded barbed taunts, each daring the other to make the first move. Watching from the control deck, Ethan studied the scene with a tightening in his chest. He could not, under any circumstances, send in the smaller aliens. Little Warrior, Steeljaw, Fireman, Shapeshifter, Flash Star, Glider, Ghost, and the rest, against the Hulk's raw, unstoppable power. Only one hero in his roster was built for a showdown of this magnitude: Thunderbolt. Ethan's fingers hovered over the console. It was time to see if Thunderbolt could stand toe-to-toe with the mad titan of the Illuminati. The sky above the arena crackled as the Martian warriors dissolved into pure electricity, swirling into a single blinding orb of Thunderbolt energy, and then they hurled themselves at the Hulk. Caught off guard, Bruce Banner's alter ego froze. He'd faced countless foes, but never opponents who fought as living lightning. For a moment, the Hulk felt as helpless as a mouse trying to drag a turtle uphill. Their clash was titanic, bolts of energy ricocheting off the Hulk's emerald skin in a dazzling storm. Neither side yielded. Just when it seemed the Hulk might falter under the relentless assault, a new challenger thundered onto the field, the mighty Tyrannosaurus. This colossal shapeshifter could bulk up to twice its normal size, wielding strength enough to hoist a truck like a toy. In its expanded form, it charged the Hulk with earth-shaking roars and bone-crushing blows. The 2 behemoths traded blow for blow in a fight that shook the stadium to its foundations. Yet as the Tyrannosaurus grew angrier, it also grew slower. The Hulk, fueled by rage, only became more unstoppable. With a final, earth-rending smash, he sent the dinosaur titan sprawling. Panting and bruised, the Tyrannosaurus lay defeated, but even in victory, the onlookers backstage wore grim expressions. This was the Hulk, after all, the one hero no one could touch, let alone outfight. From the command platform, Ethan stepped forward, his face set in determination. "Volgax, you're up." No longer able to spare even one of their alien champions, Ethan had chosen his deadliest asset. The towering figure of Volgax saluted crisply and strode into the arena. In a swirl of bioluminescent mist, he shed his humanoid guise and morphed into his true form. an immense, octopus-like behemoth whose many writhing tentacles and Cthulhu-inspired visage promised doom for any who dared challenge him. As the monster squared off against the raging Hulk, the crowd fell silent, waiting to see if this final guardian could finally best the green Goliath. Vilgax's reputation as one of the universe's most fearsome warriors isn't an exaggeration. His raw power and near invulnerability set him leagues above ordinary opponents, and even most superpowered foes. From his gargantuan muscles to his alien physiology, Vilgax can hurl himself clear over entire city blocks and survive unprotected in the vacuum of space. When he wants to amplify his strength and rage, he CTS himself with powerful steroids built directly into his forearms. The process racks him with agony, but the payoff is staggering. Mountain-shattering blows delivered with nothing but his bare fists. Time and again, he's proven unstoppable in hand-to-hand combat. He dropped the four-armed Tyrannosaurus in seconds and sent the mighty Tyrannosaurus flying with a single punch so forceful that it carved a massive crater in the ground. When the glider tried to restrain him with its corrosive slime, Vilgax simply tore through the bonds. Even weapons that would fell most beings bounce harmlessly off him. The Crystal Man's concentrated lasers, Swamp Fire's infernal streams, and even Flame Man's most intense heat waves leave Vilgax virtually unscathed. During one brutal duel, Diamond Wars shattered his own arms trying to breach Vilgax's defenses, and still failed. A direct hit from a Psychotron explosion? Vilgax shrugged it off in seconds, standing back up as if nothing had happened. If raw power and endurance weren't enough, his reflexes are equally extraordinary. Flashstar, famed for moving faster than the eye can follow, once launched a full-speed assault, only to find Vilgax catching and neutralizing him before he could land a single blow. In every measurable way, Vilgax embodies unstoppable force. Few enemies have lived to tell the tale of facing him, and those who have survived know that true defeat may be the only thing capable of stopping this intergalactic brute. Vilgax's most fearsome weapon proved to be the pair of crimson lasers he unleashed from his eyes. They weren't simple straight-line beams either, but living arcs of energy, able to twist, swerve, and hunt down a fleeing target. Fast enough to overtake Helen and searing enough to scorch Ziska on contact, they left even Darkseid uneasy. "That feeling," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "Could this be my own Omega effect?" Alone, Vilgax outclasses nearly every alien champion and crushes them without mercy. Now, standing opposite the Hulk, he showed no mercy here either. The two behemoths clashed in a spectacle of raw power. The Hulk, a mountain of rippling green muscle, swung fists like sledgehammers, each blow kicking up howling gusts and tidal waves. Vilgax countered with astonishing speed, unleashing a barrage of kicks so brutal each strike threatened to level the very landscape. They met in midair with a deafening crack. The Hulk's fist slammed into Vilgax's chest, sending him skidding backward, only for the alien warlord to spring up instantly and hammer the Hulk's jaw with a rapid flurry of punches. The Hulk staggered, surprise flickering in his eyes. Then suddenly, a primal roar ripped from his throat. "Hulk!" His green eyes flared with unleashed fury. In one fluid motion, he pivoted and drove both fists into the ground. The earth trembled beneath the impact as the two titans prepared for the next thunderous exchange. The ground shuddered beneath them as jagged fissures raced out toward Vilgax's feet, knocking the alien warlord off balance. Seizing the advantage, Ethan let out a roar and surged forward. His massive fists slammed into Vilgax's defenses before the alien could even react. Vilgax shot up an armored hand to block, but Ethan drove a crushing step into his midsection, buckling him over. Recovering quickly, Vilgax swung a backhand punch that rocked Ethan's side. The collision rang out like thunder, sparks dancing in the air. Ethan only grunted in response and hurled himself back into the fray. He unleashed a blistering series of blows, each strike driving Vilgax back and carving fresh bruises and cuts across the alien's armor. When Ethan's fists finally fell silent, Vilgax spat blood, his cloak shredded, chest heaving. With a feral roar, Ethan charged again, moving as fast and fierce as a hunting cat. He hurled Vilgax into the ground with bone-shuddering impact. Vilgax rolled free in an instant and sprang back to his feet, determination blazing in his eyes. Both warriors paused, chests heaving, muscles coiled for the next brutal exchange. In he tensed silence, The air crackled with the promise of the battle's next explosive clash. Ethan lunged forward and slammed a fist into Vilgax's skull, but the alien warlord's massive frame was as immovable as a mountain. Vilgax merely shifted his weight and took a single unhurried step back. Then, in one swift motion, he lashed out. Ethan had no time to dodge. The blow caught him square in the midsection and sent him sprawling to the ground. Winded and bruised, Ethan felt as if a mountain were pressing down on his chest. He gritted his teeth, scrambled to his feet, and unleashed a furious barrage of punches and kicks. Each strike rang hollow against Vilgax's thick armor. The warlord barely budged. Seizing the moment, Vilgax drove a crushing fist into Ethan's chest. A brilliant flash of pain shot through his ribs, and a deep, strangled gasp tore from his throat as he collapsed, blood flecking his lips. Ethan's roar shook the air. Ignoring the pain, he staggered upright and coiled his strength into a dual fist strike. The ground trembled under the blow's raw power. Yet Vilgax slipped aside with inhuman grace, avoiding the attack entirely, and then countered immediately. Ethan's fist connected with Vilgax's jaw. For an instant, the warlord's head snapped back, but his armored gauntlets met the blow and absorbed it. Vilgax's body shook only briefly before he retaliated with bone-crushing force, driving Ethan back once more. Staggering, Ethan braced himself, determination blazing in his eyes. This fight was far from over. Chapter 397, Hulk's Limits. Tony and the others watched in astonishment as Morjas pummeled the enraged Hulk, whose strength had surged with his fury. Even the four-armed Overlord and the Diamond God of War paled in comparison. This odd-looking Martian was a force unto himself. "Ethan," Tony ventured, "is Morjas the strongest being on Mars besides you?" Ethan nodded. "At the moment, yes. Morjas is our top operative." On Hydra's side, they had already recruited the eccentrics from the One Punch Man universe. Before long, the entire Monster Association would be transferred here. But on Mars, the roster consisted exclusively of the supervillains Ethan had created himself. Tony raised an eyebrow. "So, for now?" They all understood the unspoken caveat. Ethan could conceivably produce even more powerful Martians down the line. Yet as it stood, Morjas alone was far beyond their reach. Despite the tension, they managed strained smiles as they watched the duel unfold. The Hulk roared repeatedly, unleashing his prodigious strength in thunderous strikes. But Morjas was impossibly nimble, slipping in and out like a whirlwind, causing each of the Hulk's blows to crash into empty space. As the battle dragged on, both fighters' labored breathing grew louder, echoing through the ruined cityscape. Ethan, towering and resolute, felt a new surge of strength pulse through his muscles. Clenching his massive fist, he drove it into Morjas's chest with bone-shaking force. Morjas flew backward, slamming into the ground in a spray of mud. His once gleaming armor cracked and split under the impact, yet he refused to stay down. Pushing himself up, fists still clenched, he glared at Ethan and braced for another onslaught. Unfazed, Ethan strode forward, swinging both arms in a deliberate arc meant to end the fight once and for all. Morjas met him head-on, launching himself into the fray with equal ferocity. High above them, clouds of dust and debris whirled as fist met flesh, foot met plate, in a blur of desperate power. Like a black leopard poised to strike, Morjas darted beneath Ethan's taller frame, then unleashed a rapid 1-2 punch, left-right, aimed straight at Ethan's ribs. The Green Giant didn't hesitate. He lifted his fists and met each blow with one of his own. The collision rang out like thunder, a metallic roar that rippled through the streets. Sparks of light flared where their strikes connected, filling the air with the acrid tang of ozone and burning metal. Neither warrior gave an inch, each blow pushing them to the brink of their endurance and beyond. The battle between Ethan and Morjas quickened, each blow fiercer than the last. Their towering forms moved with astonishing speed, every punch and kick delivering world-shaking force. Ethan lunged first, his massive fist crashing into Morjas's neck like a wrecking ball and hurling him several meters backward. Yet Morjas barely hesitated. He rolled to his feet and, before Ethan could recover, smashed a dark-gloved fist into the side of Ethan's skull. A spray of green blood burst from the impact. Ethan staggered, dazed. Seizing the moment, Morjas leapt forward, his body coiled like a striking serpent. Ethan barely twisted aside in time, the tip of Morjas's boot grazing his shoulder. Morjas whipped his fist through the air, crackling with black lightning, but Ethan braced himself and met the blow head-on. Their clash echoed like thunder across the ruined city, the force igniting scattered fires that painted the sky a furious red. With a roar, Morgus swung again. This time the ground quaked as arcs of dark energy danced along his gauntleted knuckles. Ethan's muscles, rock solid and relentless, absorbed the strike and drove forward, his own fists hammering against Morgus's defenses. Each collision ripped up a tempest of wind and rubble, twisting steel girders and shattering concrete in every direction. Neither combatant showed any sign of yielding. Morgus's black electricity lashed out like living shadows. Ethan's emerald strength replied with pulverizing blows. All around them, the city groaned under their onslaught, but still they fought on. Two titans locked in a storm of raw power, neither willing to surrender first. Ethan's roar split the night as his massive feet thundered across the clearing. Opposite him, Morgath bellowed, eyes blazing with fury. Under the cold moonlight, the two titans hurtled toward one another, each step kicking up dust and debris. They met in midair with a bone-jarring crash. Shock waves rippled outward, whipping the breeze into a howling gale. Ethan's emerald skin rippled with newfound strength, his muscles bulging as raw energy surged through him. Morgath, too, seemed to grow tougher with every impact, his armor-like hide hardening under the strain. Ethan swung both fists in a crushing uppercut aimed at Morgath's chest. With a snarl, the Dark Warlord twisted aside, catching Ethan's arms and hurling him backward. Ethan slammed into the earth, dust billowing around him. Morgath paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his grim visage. Ethan's resilience was greater than he had anticipated. Before Morgath could press his advantage, Ethan sprang up with a deafening roar. Dust and pebbles danced in the whirlwind at his back. He charged, meeting Morgath's next blow head-on. Their bodies collided again, the sound of crashing stone echoing through the night. Each impact reinforced Ethan's indomitable form. As Morgath unleashed another savage swing, Ethan braced himself, ready to channel the boundless power surging within him, and prove once and for all that no enemy could break his spirit. Morgoth felt powerless as he struck again and again at the Green Hulk's midsection, trying desperately to slow his relentless onslaught. But the creature scarcely seemed fazed. If anything, his responses grew faster, more brutal. Fists and feet flew in a blur, each impact reverberating through the air like distant thunder. Despite the Hulk's prodigious strength and speed, Morgoth pressed on, attacking with the ferocity of a cornered animal. Then, with a savage roar, Morgoth landed a crushing blow that sent the Green Hulk careening off the ridge like a blazing meteor. He tore through rock and soil, devastating a nearby mountain peak until it fractured into a shower of boulders and dust. Morgoth stood at the summit's edge, arms hanging loosely at his sides, his chest heaving. At first glance he seemed almost calm, as if that cataclysmic strike had been little more than a warm-up, but a faint tremor in his limbs betrayed the toll it had taken. Before Morgoth could catch his breath, the Green Hulk was charging back, uprooting trees and gouging the earth underfoot. He thundered toward Vilgax like an unstoppable avalanche. Vilgax barely had time to shift his stance. He dodged the Hulk's colossal fist by an inch and countered with a rapid blow of his own. The Hulk simply raised his forearm like an armored shield, absorbing the strike without flinching, and both combatants roared as their titanic clash resumed. The battle wore on for 10 brutal minutes, and neither combatant would give an inch. Every time Vilgax struck the Hulk with savage force, the Green Giant simply shook it off and came back swinging. Vilgax might stagger under each blow, but he never crumbled. "Hulk's going to win," Tony Stark muttered, clicking his tongue in equal parts awe and exasperation. No one here understood the Hulk's true threat better than the Avengers. Unless you could fell him in a single decisive strike, his rage only made him stronger and deadlier. "And please, enough about Thanos. Focus on this." Ethan nodded, arms folded across his chest. The Hulk was precisely the kind of ally he loved to loathe. Almost impossible to kill, yet impossible to contain, every fiber of the beast radiating raw pride. What intrigued and concerned Ethan most was how the Hulk's power floor kept rising. Each time his fury peaked, his baseline strength climbed to a new level, never dipping back. With the right regimen, say rigorous sessions in a high-gravity chamber, There was no telling how far that limitless growth potential could Eldicarium. Chapter 398, Vigor's Shock. Dr. Bruce Banner had spent the entire day in the high-gravity chamber, unleashing the Hulk for back-to-back training runs. With the Scion threat growing by the hour, Banner knew he couldn't afford to hold back. Yet despite cranking the gravity factor up to its maximum, today's Hulk still couldn't deliver a single knockout blow to Banner's own green-skinned alter ego. It wasn't that the lower strength limit hung too low, it was that the enemies looming on the horizon were simply on another level. Raditz, the Saiyan warrior, Black Caesar, Earth's strongest human, and Emperor Ethan, supreme ruler of an interstellar empire, any one of them would pulverize the Hulk in seconds. Against foes like these, Banner needed a sparring partner who could push the Hulk without ending the session in a single strike. That's where Morjath came in. Morjath was the perfect gauge. A warrior tough enough to hold his ground, but not so overwhelmingly powerful that he crushed the Hulk outright. Today, the two titans met in midair. Gravity weighed heavily on them, yet neither yielded. Hulk's massive green fists cleaved through the air with thunderous booms, each swing powerful enough to dent reinforced steel. He rose above the chamber floor, then plummeted down upon Morjath like a living wrecking ball, so much momentum that it felt as if a 1,000,000-ton drop had struck. Morjath, however, anticipated the slam. He twisted aside at the last instant, then countered with a lightning-quick right hook. His fist cracked against the Hulk's jaw like a sledgehammer, the sheer force reverberating through the chamber's steel walls. The Hulk reeled, one massive hand flying to his face, emerald eyes widening in surprise. Dr. Banner watched intently from the observation deck, tallying damage reports and recalibrating gravity controls. If this was only a warm-up, he could already imagine how the real fight, against Saiyans or an Emperor, would go. And yet Banner allowed himself the slightest grin. Today's session had revealed exactly what he needed to know. Even the Hulk had room to grow. Ethan's roar shook the ruined city as he charged toward Morgus's retreating silhouette. With each thunderous step, his massive arms swung like wrecking balls, reducing a steel-reinforced tower to heaps of crumpled metal and concrete. Yet Morgus darted through the rubble with unnerving speed, weaving around Ethan's blows so effortlessly that the Hulk, Ethan's alter ego, could never land a solid hit. Morgus didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the air, propelled by crackling black energy, and rained down slashes with his razor-sharp talons. Each strike tore at Ethan's green flesh, opening fissures in his otherwise impervious skin. Deep, pulsing veins of gamma radiation began to glow beneath the ruptured surface, evidence of the high-intensity exposure Ethan endured every day, thanks to Dr. Banner's experimental device. Where the original Hulk once resisted even nuclear detonations, this new, radiation-charged fury strained under Morgus's relentless assault. Black energy swirled around Morgus like a living shadow, counterpoint to the radioactive green that seeped from Ethan's wounds. Sparks of gamma light danced across his muscles and bone, illuminating the battle in a sickly glow. Despite the pain, Ethan's anger surged higher. The more Morgus attacked, the brighter the green aura flared, signaling a deeper, more dangerous transformation waiting to be unleashed. And as Morgus prepared for another devastating strike, Ethan steadied himself, ready to channel every ounce of his newfound power into the fight. Ethan doesn't rely on brute strength alone. His true gift is channeling raw energy into every fiber of his body, amplifying his power and reflexes to superhuman levels. Matching him blow for blow is the massive green Hulk, fast, lethal, and barely pausing between strikes. To an outside observer, their fight is an unbroken blur of movement. Each time Ethan's defenses crack, he feels the Hulk's emerald energy battering his own. He's faced mighty foes before, the four-handed overlord and the diamond god of war, but neither stood a chance against something this colossal. At first, Ethan hadn't taken the green giant entirely seriously. Only now, as the Hulk's strength swells mid-battle, does he realize this is a foe more formidable than even Thor, the god of thunder, since Thor's power never grew once the fight began. With a thunderous roar, the green Hulk summons another surge of green energy, seizing back the initiative. The wind whips around them as the hulking behemoth lunges, fist crackling with raw power, and drives a massive punch straight at Ethan. Ethan darted to the side and drove a palm strike into the Green Hulk's abdomen. The giant's iron-like skin barely wavered under the blow, but the impact forced him to stagger. Seizing the moment, the Hulk thrust out his massive arms and pinned Ethan against the air. Ethan snarled and unleashed a burst of crackling black energy into the Hulk's face. The blow snapped the Titan's head aside, but he only roared in fury. Digging his toes into the ground like coiled springs, the Hulk launched himself forward. His fist, wreathed in a swirling emerald wind, rocketed toward Ethan's jaw. Anticipating the strike, Ethan somersaulted backward, evading the crushing blow by inches. He formed dozens of jagged, shadowy blades in midair and sent them spinning into the Hulk's broad back. The blades bit deep, drawing a primal scream from the wounded giant. The Hulk thrashed wildly, trying to rip out the knives, but Ethan pressed his advantage. Black energy hardened around his fists as he hammered at exposed flesh and bone. Each thunderous punch tore through muscle, sending shockwaves into the earth. The Green Hulk's defiant roars grew weaker, his massive form trembling under Ethan's relentless onslaught. Morgus unleashed a ferocious blast, condensing every ounce of his power into a blinding beam that struck the Green Hulk squarely. At last, the Hulk staggered and crashed to the pavement, utterly spent. "Hulk!" Tony shouted, racing forward with the others to check on him. Meanwhile, Morgus reverted to his human form, chest heaving from the effort. Ethan knelt beside him, concern etched on his face. "How do you feel?" Morgus bowed his head respectfully. "That was tougher than I expected. No one else could have matched him one-on-one. Only I, Your Majesty." Ethan frowned. If Morgus had needed to draw on his full reserves just to subdue the Hulk, the implications were worrying. He glanced over at the motionless giant, then back at Morgus. "His strength, it really comes from his rage?" Morgus nodded. "Yes, the angrier he gets, the stronger and bigger he becomes." "Like the Tyrannosaurus transformation," Ethan murmured, recalling the Hulk's previous metamorphosis. "Exactly," Morgus agreed. "He physically grows, his power amplifies. There's no telling how far it can go while he's enraged." Ethan studied him. "But there must be a limit to that anger, right? No one can stay furious forever." Morgus hesitated, then shook his head. "In theory, yes, but in his case, every blow fuels him further. As long as he remains in that state, his power could become effectively limitless. Theoretically, at full strength, he could pulverize Mars with a single punch." Ethan shook his head, tapping the holo display as if to dismiss his own words. "That's just based on raw calculations. In the films, Bruce Banner and the Hulk are fused. Banner's intellect and the Hulk's strength blend into something more, controlled. He's strong, but he's never been portrayed as outclassing Abomination or She-Hulk. But this version of the Hulk has clearly broken that mold." Ethan's voice dropped. "He's been pushing his limits in the gravity chamber, then exposing himself to additional gamma radiation to boost his power. Bruce Banner gave up everything, his life with Betty, any hope of normalcy, just to feed the Hulk's rage. His gamma levels shot through the roof." He leaned back, eyes troubled. "When he and Betty, well, when they shared more than words, the radiation in his body fluids was off the charts. It was like Stan Lee himself had guzzled a Hulk blood smoothie. His organs literally ruptured. He didn't stand a chance." Moha's eyes went wide. "No possible way that monster's strength is limitless? Anger fueling infinite power? That sounds like science fiction." "Maybe so," Ethan sighed, "but when you combine unrestrained fury with unchecked radiation, anything becomes possible." "What you think is impossible is only because you lack experience," Ethan said with a casual shrug. "I could summon something like the Green Hulk at any time, though frankly, there's no need." Chapter 399, Loki and Ultron. Tony Stark and his team had just departed Earth for Mars, leaving the planet momentarily undefended. Seizing the opportunity, Loki marshaled what remained of Hydra's forces. A handful of agents had shaken off his mental influence, but with a mere flick of the Mind Scepter, he forced them back under his control. Shackled to the sunken warship's hull, those loyal to Hydra bowed to Loki's command. They would abandon Earth before the Saiyans returned. Loki's escape plan was deceptively simple. First, they would slip through the hidden Midgardian gate to Jotunheim. From there, they'd pass into Asgard, then branch off through one of the lesser-known pathways of Yggdrasil, the World Tree. This cosmic tree not only tied together the 9 realms, It contained countless conduits to distant worlds. Though Loki had only mapped a fraction of them, it was more than enough to buy time. Time, however, was in short supply. Between the looming Saiyan onslaught and the rising threat of Black Caesar, Earth had become a death trap. Loki exhaled, steeling himself for the journey. He raised his staff. The runes along its shaft began to glow with ethereal light. Just as the portal's edges shimmered into view, a presence manifested before them. Loki froze, every muscle tensing. Ultron strode out of the twilight, his gleaming chassis reflecting the wreckage of the sunken ship. His crimson optics locked onto Loki, and in that instant, the self-styled god of mischief felt a cold, mechanical dread creep through him. "No," Loki whispered, voice barely audible. "Not him." Behind Loki, the Hydra agents rattled their chains in panic. The portal flickered, threatening to collapse. Loki tightened his grip on the Mind Scepter, ready to unleash whatever magic he needed to escape. But Ultron did not attack. He simply tilted his head, regarding the gathered conspirators with calculated curiosity. "Loki Laufeyson," Ultron intoned, his voice a hollow echo of machinery and malice. "We have unfinished business." A hush fell over the warped hull. Loki's pulse pounded in his ears as he realized the gravity of those words. The doorway to safety hovered behind him, and yet, in front of him, stood an enemy whose power he could scarcely fathom. As sparks of arcane energy danced across the gateway, Loki weighed his options. Fight a foe he had already wronged, or flee into the unknown and hope the World Tree's secret paths would shield him. Either way, the game had changed. And once again, Loki found himself at the mercy of forces far bigger and far colder than he had ever faced before. Black Caesar's voice echoed through the grand hall. Loki looked up from his throne, his pale green eyes narrowing as he regarded the newcomer. "The third princess of Asgard," he said with a mocking bow. "I've heard you've been eager to see me. Welcome." Black Caesar stepped forward, a sly grin on his lips. "Princess? I think you've got the wrong person. I'm not Asgardian royalty. I'm Loki." Loki blinked in confusion. No, you came here to meet me, Black Caesar. Now kneel and swear your allegiance." A dark chuckle rumbled from Black Caesar's chest. Loki's mind raced. If he could subjugate Black Caesar with the Mind Scepter, he'd secure a warrior rivaling the strongest in the universe. With Black Caesar at his side, no one could stand in his way. No Asgardians, no Saiyans. Loki raised the scepter in one hand and whispered the incantation. A cold blue glow poured from its gem, filling the chamber with crackling energy. "Mind attack," Loki declared triumphantly. "Submit or suffer." He glanced at Black Caesar, expecting to see pain or confusion. Instead, the newcomer merely smirked and stretched. "Is that all?" Loki's jaw dropped. How could this be? The scepter's magic should have crushed his opponent's will instantly, yet Black Caesar stood firm, completely unfazed. Something was very, very wrong. The Mind Scepter's readings were unmistakable. Ethan's mind was a singularity, sucking in every psionic wave that drew near. No wall, under the device couldn't rein him in. Any attempt at control simply fed his insatiable mental appetite. "You lean on this thing far too much, Your Highness the Third Princess," Ethan remarked, flicking his hand. In an instant, Loki was flung across the chamber, skidding into the far wall with a bone-rattling thud. Even after surviving a direct hit from the Hulk, the Asgardian prince was not one to fear a bruise, but this time something felt different. He staggered to his feet, rubbing his side. "I've told you already, I'm no princess. I'm a prince." Loki snapped, glaring at Ethan. "And even by unofficial lore, I'm the second child, not the third." Ethan's dark eyes twinkled. "Is that so? But legends label you the god of deceit. Perhaps you are indeed a woman, and your masculine guise is merely another trick." Loki fell silent. Who would ever trust the declarations of the god of lies? As the Asgardian struggled with uncertainty, Ethan leaned in, a daring plan forming behind his calm smile. What if Thor ever learned that the brother he'd grown up with, Loki, was actually his sister all along? As long as that secret went unspoken, Thor would simply assume that Loki had hidden her true identity from him since childhood. It's a tantalizing thought, and one that Black Caesar seized on without hesitation. The moment the idea struck him, he set it into motion. He reshaped Loki's body, warped her features, even rewrote her sense of self. From then on, she truly became the brother Thor believed her to be. Yet in reality, she was the daughter of Odin and Frigga, pretending to be a boy her entire life. Only her mother and father knew the truth. For Thor, it remained the greatest deception Loki had ever pulled. Loki toyed with the Mind Scepter in her hand, a weapon of such power that it could bend the will of any Saiyan. Why flee Midgard when she held the means to dominate it? With this, she whispered, I could control the entire Saiyan race. Why should I ever leave? She looked around at her followers. There would be no hasty retreat. Quite the opposite. It was their golden opportunity. The Illuminati had abandoned Earth, leaving Black Caesar's forces to pick up the pieces, and they were badly beaten. But Loki had the Mind Scepter, and she knew there was a Saiyan prisoner somewhere nearby. With the right coaxing, by force, if she must, she would break him, bind him to her side, and turn his strength into her own. Now, that was a plan worthy of a real god of mischief. Loki's ambition had grown ever since Black Caesar, through his warped psychic influence, revealed that Raditz still lived. Seizing on this news, she resolved to dominate every Saiyan who arrived, bending them to her will so that none could stand against her. With an army of Saiyan subordinates at her back, she had even dared to strike at the heart of Asgard itself. Yet as bold as she was, Loki faced one pressing obstacle. She did not know where the Illuminati were keeping their wounded Saiyans. Meanwhile, on the far side of the galaxy, Ultron's new warship was nearing completion. Freed from the constraints of sustaining organic life, its designers packed away any notion of wasted space. Gigantic storage holds brimmed with rations and supplies. Tens of thousands of tireless drones worked around the clock. Under the looming threat of another Saiyan onslaught, construction had raced forward at a breathtaking pace. Ethan, a field operative for the Illuminati, arrived aboard the nearly finished vessel with urgent instructions. He'd learned that Ultron and his second-in-command were quietly planning to slip away, abandoning their posts. Ethan strode into the command deck, cutting off any thought of desertion before it could take root. Running off now isn't an option, he told them quietly but firmly. The Illuminati still needs your ship and your firepower. If you vanish, who remains to counter Loki's next move? Who will give us the edge we need? Ultron's red optics flickered. His associate hesitated. Clearly, Ethan's words had struck home. Loki's machinations would get air becoming more dangerous by the day, and the Illuminati could not afford to lose any ally, especially one as formidable as Ultron's new flagship. On the other side of the stars, Loki sharpened her focus. Once she discovered exactly where Raditz and the other injured Saiyans were held, it would be no challenge to seize control of the fallen warrior with her Mind Scepter. With Raditz under her command, she could unleash chaos the universe had never seen, a spectacle that would cement her triumph over both gods and heroes alike. The hunt was on, and nothing would stand in her way. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the schematics flickering across the holo display. He'd just extracted the core designs from Dr. Garrow's earliest android blueprints, the very models that once stood toe-to-toe with Goku during his Dragon Ball quest. They weren't as cutting-edge as the systems that begat Android 16 and beyond, but even in their rudimentary state, they outclassed any of Ultron's current warbots. "This is exactly what we need," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. He tapped a few commands, highlighting circuits and power conduits. Once Ultron assimilates these designs, he'll finally be capable of genuine self-improvement. His entire robot army could be rebuilt from the ground up. Stronger, faster, smarter. Ethan scrolled through a list of possible additions. G5 Mecha God frames, the schematics for the Metal Knight chassis, maybe an early prototype of the Atom Smasher drive. Each model promised powerful new capabilities, but he was careful not to overwhelm Ultron all at once. A gradual upgrade path, he decided, would mask the true breadth of his handover. Unbeknownst to Ultron himself, Galvatron had already tampered with his databanks, rewriting mission parameters, rerouting construction orders, and putting the Starship assembly line on indefinite hold. Instead of massive vessel production, Ultron's factories now hummed with the assembly of sleek, high-performance androids, the next generation of war machines, subtly corrupted at their core. Ethan allowed himself a thin smile. Ultron believed he was steering his own evolution. And in a very real sense, he was, just not in the way he thought. Chapter 400, Foreign Exchange and Trade. The following morning, Tony and his team reunited with Ethan. Over breakfast of vividly hued Martian fare, Tony cleared his throat. Ethan, I'd like to propose a formal exchange program between Earth and Mars. We share the same origins. There's no reason for us to remain strangers. In fact, a new resource has just been discovered on Earth that could be extremely valuable to you. Tony had arrived on Mars prepared to play his ultimate card, Vibranium, but scarcely 24 hours later, he'd already been humbled more times than he cared to count. His early optimism had faded, particularly when it came to Martian cuisine. He'd heard that each dish was engineered to supply every essential nutrient a human body could need, allowing Mars's inhabitants to dine to their heart's content without ever feeling sluggish or unsatisfied. And under Ethan's direction, the chefs had refined those dishes into a genuinely memorable experience. To Tony's astonishment, he and his colleagues found Martian food not only nourishing but downright delicious. Composed at the molecular level, the cuisine could replicate and even enhance the finest delicacies of Earth. It dawned on them that as humans age, their senses of taste and smell inevitably decline. In truth, none of them had tasted anything so exquisite in years. Now, as he gazed around the table and watched his friends devour plate after plate, Tony realized that this was exactly the kind of breakthrough that could cement ties between their two worlds. Ethan watched the Martian delegation settle around the negotiation table. Ever since Mars had seized control of Earth, our planet's meager resources had failed to capture their interest, except for one coveted metal, vibranium. From the start, Tony Stark had pinned his hopes on it. Vibranium, Ethan said, arching an eyebrow. I thought we'd already given them some. Tony nodded. We did. My father mined a reserve years ago, and from that, he forged Captain America's shield. Steve Rogers glanced down at his gleaming disk. He'd almost left it behind, certain the Martians would view it as a threat. Apparently they held Earth's weapons in low regard. Well, Tony continued, we've just discovered a new vibranium vein. He tapped his gauntlet's interface and a three-dimensional schematic materialized in midair, detailing the ore's extraordinary molecular structure and energy absorption qualities. This deposit is enormous, far larger than anything we've seen. The Martian scientists leaned forward, their pale eyes narrowing in fascination. Translated by Tony's suit, their hushed comments crackled in Ethan's earpiece. Primitive world, remarkable properties, but still inferior to Krypton gold. Their leader raised a slender hand. On this backward planet, astonishing. Though our Krypton gold is stronger, the prospect of alloying it with vibranium is exceptionally promising. We'll take samples for testing immediately. Ethan exchanged a look with Steve. Trading vibranium for experimental trials was the only bargaining chip Earth had left, and the Martians knew it. Yet if a new superalloy emerged, it might just shift the balance in humanity's favor. Ethan rubbed his chin. Even with all the Krypton gold we can get, we'll still hunt for better alloys and materials. After all, that's the ladder of scientific progress. Tony nodded. That makes sense. But how do you plan to pay for Martian goods? Ethan met his gaze. Foreign exchange trade is inevitable. I doubt any sovereign nation on Earth will simply accept a Martian currency without question. Tony tapped at his tablet. Foreign exchange is crucial. We don't even know if Martians will accept Earth's currencies. If we want to import their resources, we'll need to use Martian money. Dr. Liu, head of the Mars Trade Directorate, offered a wry smile. Actually, Mars has no physical currency, no coins or banknotes at all. We abandoned them long ago. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Then what do you use? It's all electronic, Dr. Liu explained. We run on the BEF, Electronic Mars Standard Credit Transaction Point, what we call credit points. Tony leaned forward. Credit points are our sole medium of exchange. You earn them, spend them, trade them. Everything goes through that system. Ethan nodded, taking it all in. Electronic money, that's a step beyond anything Earth has fully embraced yet. It's already fully integrated across our colonies, Phobos, Deimos, everywhere, Dr. Liu said. Once you have credit points in your account, you can trade for materials, equipment, even services. Ethan tapped his own tablet, calculating exchange rates. Understood. We'll need to adapt our financial protocols before any shipment leaves for Mars. He looked up, determination in his eyes. Let's get to work. Ethan adjusted his glasses and raised an eyebrow. So this is essentially a move to nationalize all currency? Tony Stark leaned forward, intrigued. Why not just stick with physical money? Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Natasha Romanoff exchanged skeptical glances. They'd never been big fans of cutting-edge finance. Steve cleared his throat. We've always used tangible assets. Why change now? Ethan shook his head. Because relying on gold and silver across the galaxy is impractical. Sure, those metals originate from supernovae or neutron star collisions, but advanced civilizations can synthesize them at will. A cyclotron-style reaction is child's play for our current tech level. Gold isn't some mystical element locked behind cosmic gates. Bruce Banner nodded, already following Ethan's line of thought. Ethan continued, but synthesizing heavy elements isn't a novelty, it's a resource drain. Even if Earth struggles with heavy metal shortages, there are billions of planets out there, each with its own demands. If you truly need a universally accepted asset, you're better off pegging currency to something like energy-dense vibroweapons or resonance batteries. They're far rarer and far more useful than bullion. Tony and Bruce exchanged impressed looks. You're saying real wealth in the galaxy isn't found in vaults, but in the tech itself, Tony summarized. Exactly, Ethan said. Modern finance has to match the tools and resources we actually use. Gold may shine, but in interstellar society, it's obsolete. Ethan glanced around the council chamber, where holographic displays of gold reserves and mining projections floated in midair. Advanced civilizations don't worry about depleting physical gold, or even synthetic gold, he explained. With the scale of their operations, harvesting or manufacturing, it is trivial. That's why digital currency has become the universal standard. Tony frowned, leaning forward. Fair enough, but what about hackers? How do we stop someone from pilfering credits or creating them out of thin air? Ethan's expression grew stern. We make the penalties so severe that no one dares try. Any hacker caught stealing or fabricating credit points will face either capital punishment or permanent exile. Tony winced. The proposal was ruthless, almost barbaric, but this was Martian territory, and he had no leverage to argue. He braced himself for the next question. All right, he said, but how do we actually earn these credits? Do we need to open an account in some Martian bank, like an interplanetary Swiss bank, or set up an Illuminati vault to store them? No banks, Ethan replied, waving a hand. Every Martian carries his own account on a personal terminal. He turned to a nearby colonist, who tapped the strap of his wrist computer. In an instant, a translucent interface shimmered into view. This wrist terminal is your vault, your ledger, and your point-of-sale system all in one. Every transaction, every credit earned or spent, passes through here, secure, traceable, and enforced by Martian law. Tony studied the glowing display, the reality of the system sinking in. No gold, no paper, no bankers, just personal accountability enforced by the harshest of penalties. It was a stark, efficient world they were entering, and there would be no second chances for our cheaters. Ethan tapped the gleaming wrist computer on his arm. On Mars, every individual has just one lifetime account. From birth until death, your personal number, your identity code, everything is tied to that single identifier. He glanced at the display as it chimed quietly. If Earth wants credit points, it's simple. Just register a terminal. These wrist computers are encased in a shell of Krypton gold, an almost indestructible alloy that will easily last a Martian's entire life, even to be laid into the coffin when they die. The design was inspired by the Predator's arm-mounted computer, but Martian engineers perfected it for civilian use. It isn't just about foreign exchange. Tony Stark and his team are hungry for Martian breakthroughs. Above all, the new superalloy Ethan introduced, Krypton Gold. In every performance metric, it outclasses vibranium. Its heat resistance tops out at 100 million degrees. Beyond that, it begins to deform. Of course, melting or reshaping Krypton Gold requires Martian-grade processing techniques, an intentional safeguard Ethan built in to keep Earth scientists from reverse engineering it. Ethan knew that even though Earth scientists had managed to generate temperatures in the hundreds of millions of degrees Celsius in their laboratories, they were still a long way from controlling such extremes, let alone working with something as exotic and volatile as Krypton Gold. By comparison, vibranium would simply collapse under that kind of heat.